And at 10, Firebrand. A superpowered enforcer for Justin Hammer, Firebrand is a former activist who turned to violence after believing peaceful protests produced no results. Which sounds awfully familiar now thanks to the Flag Smasher's introduction, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. First appearing in Iron Man Volume 1 number 27 from 1970, Gary Gilbert was born in Detroit, Michigan. Gary wore a suit with an armored exoskeleton that gave him superhuman strength and resistance to fire. It also housed flamethrowers, which allowed him to shoot out, fire, and thermal blasts from his hands, one mounted on each wrists, and flying jets that gave him the ability to fly, which I'm pretty sure sounds familiar at this point. Except with the Flag Smashers having already been introduced, and no Iron Man remaining in the MCU as a counter, Firebrand making an appearance seems a little far-fetched. It's still entirely possible, perhaps this version gets inspired by the Flag Smashers, and maybe Peter or someone has to end up dealing with them, but it would be on a much smaller scale, since with all the movements, Marvel could be worried about upsetting people, and I don't think that they would handle, I don't know how they would handle this one. And at 9, Spy Master. First introduced in Iron Man number 33 in 1971, the original Spy Master was leader of the Espionage Elite, and they were a formidable opponent for Iron Man, and successfully infiltrated Stark Industries on more than one occasion. Man, it's like Star Labs, just walk in the front door. He's also evaded Iron Man's grasp multiple times. After his operative Mark Sharon was killed by the Ghost while using the Spy Master identity, the original Spy Master just let the world believe that he was dead. Others have attempted to assume the role as Spy Master, but none really did all that well. Years later, he returned to action after being found by Norman Osborn, but quickly returned to the shadows. He owned a supervillain club, and when the Avengers left Earth in order to battle the Builders, he gathered a group of supervillains and then broke in Stark Tower to steal Iron Man's technology, because the tower was basically defenseless. And while this could be plausible, seeing how Iron Man is dead so his compound would remain partially unguarded, I don't think that the MCU is going to go this route, even if the character has been around for 50 years. It was actually 50 years this January, which is kinda nuts. And at 8, Blizzard. Dr. Gregor Shapanka, PhD, was an employee of Stark Industries. He was conducting private research into a means of achieving physical immortality when first introduced in Tales of Suspense number 45 in 1963. However, he attempted to rob a private vault of Anthony Stark, so he could obtain microtransistor designs that Shapanka had intended to sell to further finance his research, because, he was trying to be immortal, and that's what everyone does when they want to be immortal. However, he was caught, and unsuccessful, because, it was stupid. I guess he didn't have the Thieves Guild training like I do. I mean, I'd show the tattoo, but I have a full sleeve on and a suit, so I can't really, but still. Anyway, he was brought before Stark, who then fired him, understandably, because, he tried to steal from him. Subsequently, Shapanka also created a suit that could generate intense cold, which he had hoped to slow his own aging process. He then started using the suit and its abilities to commit crimes in order to, get more money to fund more research, because, everyone needs that villain. Doc Ock, Jack Frost. Well, I mean, the news media had called this new criminal Jack Frost, which is an insult to the man who played Jack Frost in the Santa Claus 3, who also played Mr. Honeywell on How I Met Your Mother. Anyway, he later changes his name from Jack Frost to Blizzard, and eventually the suit comes into the hands of Donnie Gill, who assumes the title in 1987 after Gregor's death in The Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 20 in 1986. And at 7, Crimson Dynamo. Technically, in a sense, Crimson Dynamo was already introduced into the MCU. However, his actual name of Anton Vanko was introduced to the MCU as the father of Whiplash, which I think just proves my point alone as to why Crimson Dynamo is too powerful for the MCU. First introduced in Tales of Suspense number 46 in 1963, the Crimson Dynamo's armor was equipped with an array of miniature electrical generators that allowed him to generate and manipulate electrical fields for a variety of effects, including but not limited to electrical blasts, electrical override, and a disruptor field that could be used to scramble electronic devices. Wonderful. The character was so strong that they had to make a new character named Ivan and make him Whiplash, who was introduced into the comics in Iron Man vs. Whiplash, but in the comics, he was also named Anton Vanko, with no relation to the Crimson Dynamo. It's confusing as hell. And at 6, Titanium Man. First introduced in Tales of Suspense number 69, nice. From 1965, not as nice, Boris Bolsky quickly rose through Soviet government ranks and became popular in the Communist Party. He had also briefly worked with Black Widow as an intelligence agent, but due to political reasons, he was assigned to Serbia. He learned that some of the camp members were scientists that had worked with Anton Vanko, who, as I mentioned last number, was the Crimson Dynamo. So Bolsky planned to make a new armor set capable of defeating Iron Man to prove the USSR's superiority over the US, because of course that's why. A titanium alloy armor was made, however, and it was much larger and heavier than Iron Man's, due to the camp lacking sufficient resources to design micro components. Because, Tony Stark built this in a cave! with a pile of scraps! Polsky was unable to defeat Iron Man on several occasions. However, I don't think this character would be introduced because they already made reference to him in the first Iron Man movie, where Stark made his suit a gold titanium alloy, which I thought was funny since people were calling him Iron Man, but in reality it was gold titanium alloy man. But like, you know, that line now makes more sense with this. Plus, Tony's dead, so I don't think they could want to beat Iron Man unless they go after like Pepper Potts or something. Halfway through into number 5, Fin Fang Foom. Okay, let's be honest. Most of the supervillains that heroes fight are at least similar to them in some way. Most of Iron Man's villains have some form of robotic suits like his, but less efficient. Spider-Man's are mostly animal themed. However, when Iron Man went up against an actual fucking dragon, we all seemed a little bit confused. That's Fin Fang Foom for you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, well, he's not an actual dragon, but for a while, the Mandarin, who was working with Finn, did actually believe that he was a dragon of myths and legend. The two together ended up conquering a third of China, and honestly, that's kinda nuts. However, it was revealed that Finn was actually an alien and that his fellow aliens were coming to conquer Earth, resulting in Mandarin having to team up with Iron Man and War Machine to stop it. I'm sure Mandarin regretted this decision after he found out that, you know, he's an alien. I don't think the MCU is going to introduce Finn, at least yet. But honestly, I don't know anymore with the whole multiverse, and now there's more happening, and like a dragon turns out to be an alien. It's par for the course at this point. But I think that Fin Fang Foom is a little too much for the MCU. In at 4, Ultimo. Like I said last number, most supervillains at least base part of their persona off the hero, because we all know villains just want Senpai to notice them. MatPat, I'm still waiting on you. Getting MatPat to notice me will literally be my supervillain origin story. Anyway, Ultimo is no different. However, he didn't really do this to himself. Ultimo is a giant robot created by an alien race that the Mandarin had taken control of. The cool one, not the actor. First introduced in Tales of Suspense number 76 in 1966, Ultimo only died recently in 2020, Force Works number 3 in June of 2020. While Ultimo was under his control, however, Mandarin claimed that Ultimo was his own creation. The only thing though that Mandarin actually created, besides changing his programming, was an artificial blue skin for the robot. Yeah. Mandarin utilized Ultimo numerous times against Iron Man, including once in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. During that battle, Iron Man trapped Ultimo beneath the Earth's crust, and as a result, the robot meandered through the planet's magma. And you know what that caused him to do? Not melt, but absorb more power. Years later, when Iron Man was in battle with like a rock creature who was called the Earth Mover for some reason in California, Ultimo re-emerged without his blue skin, significantly taller and much more powerful. He vaporized the Earth Mover in a second and destroyed a remote unit of Iron Man, and then went on just destroying everything he could. So safe to say it's probably a little too much for the MCU. Getting close to the end, into number 3, Count Nefaria. Count Lucino Nefaria was the descendant of a long line of Italian noblemen, and he inherited a vast fortune. If only. Introduced in Avengers number 13 in 1965, damn, these guys are old, Nefaria was fascinated with technological advances, and throughout his life commissioned scientists to create inventions that were far in advance of their current scientific standing. After allowing himself to be experimented on though, Nefaria was granted absurd levels of super strength, speed, and energy projection strong enough to make him a danger to any and all superhero teams. That's why Nefaria was introduced as a generic Marvel Universe villain in the Avengers instead of just an Iron Man rogue, and has had several run-ins with both the Avengers and the X-Men. And while we've had some powerful adversaries in the MCU, I think that at this point, the super strong, fast, and energy projecting Count Nefaria is going to be saved for another Avengers movie at least, or maybe even a new big bad if they get that far. But I think that it's probably going to be a little much.
Coming number 2, Onslaught. Making his first debut in X-Men issue number 15, Onslaught was a sentient psionic entity created from the minds of Charles Xavier and Magneto. That's pretty messed up. So when the X-Men were fighting the Acolytes, Wolverine hit Magneto, and then in return Magneto ripped the adamantium from his bones, which, gotta say, I thought hangnails were bad. This sounds like an absolute nightmare. His healing factor had to work overtime for sure. Xavier shut down Magneto's mind, which made him catatonic, but during this moment all of Magneto's lust for hate and violence leaked into Charles' consciousness, creating this new personality called Onslaught. He now obtained the ability to tap into the psychic resources of the astral plane, where he could then manipulate matter and energy. There's also a red Onslaught, but I'll save that for another time. Last but certainly not least, our number 1 spot, Apocalypse. Esteban Noor, making his first steps in Marvel graphic novel issue number 17, was born nearly 5,000 years ago at the edge of the Valley of the Kings in ancient Egypt. He was abandoned by his tribe because of the fact that he looked, well, different. He had the Avatar look going on, for lack of a better explanation. He later was raised by the nomads with the idea that only the strong survive, a tough way for a child to think and live. He actually was killed by agents of Ozymandias, but was later revived thanks to his mutant abilities. For example, his self-molecular manipulation allows for him to alter his physical form, and he's also a genius. Even before being modified by the celestial ship, Apocalypse was already living for thousands of years. All he has to do is enter a deep sleep. In the X-Men Apocalypse storyline, we see just how big and bad the guy can get though.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Wolverine. Wolverine has had a pretty crazy past, so it's no surprise he's gone down a few dark roads. In the movie Logan, we see two Wolverines battling it out, and it's glorious and it's gory. It's so gory. In Age of Apocalypse, Logan goes from being an X-Men to the Horsemen of Death. It's a great comic. Yeah, Apocalypse actually had Wolverine square up against Sabretooth in order to see who becomes the new Horseman. Wolverine, of course, came out on top, and Apocalypse restored the adamantium to his skeleton. Quite the deal if you ask me. And to make matters worse, Apocalypse replaced Wolverine with a scroll so the X-Men wouldn't notice. So there's a few comics here that could blend nicely into the MCU, like Apocalypse replacing Wolverine with a scroll. This is totally possible, with Ryan Reynolds confirming that the next Deadpool would have included Logan on this road trip. That plus the fact that they're best friends in real life. I mean, Adam Sandler has like 15 of his friends in every movie, so I'm sure they're planning to bring Logan in with Deadpool in that deal in some way, shape, or form. Would it be Apocalypse making him evil? Probably not, but never say never. And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be so helpful. It helps our channel out quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Tap that thumbs up. Let's keep this video going. Number 9, Pyro. Pyro was once a student at the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. And in X-Men 2, we see him hanging out with Iceman and Rogue. He's having a great time just hanging out with some super students. But by the end of the movie, he switches over to Magneto's side, facing off against Bobby. In the comics, St. John Allardyce made his first appearance as Pyro in X-Men 141. He was born and raised in Australia, and his powers, well, as you could probably guess, has something to do with fire. When he was young, he met Mystique, and then he ended up joining her new brotherhood of evil mutants. We need more fire bad guys, plain and simple. We have none in the MCU. I mean, we had some kind of with Spider-Man Far From Home, but that was all just Mysterio being Mysterio. Number 8, Shadow King. Making his first appearance in X-Men 117, the Shadow King is a multiversal manifestation of the dark side of the human consciousness. Spawned, of course, by the first Nightmare. Amal Farouk was the leader of an underground syndicate located in the Thieves' Quarter of Cairo, Egypt. He's a powerful mutant who also happened to be a vessel for said Shadow King. Farouk was able to control everybody around him, and it's pretty terrifying. He feeds on the shadows of your soul. So yeah, with Marvel now veering off to the cosmic side of things, I think we can get a Shadow King behind the scenes secretly just sucking the life out of our world's finest. In the comics before World War II, Amal Farouk worked with Baron von Strucker to try and destabilize Britain's political structure. So maybe this guy has been here the whole time and he's just been lurking in the shadows. We just don't know it yet. I mean, he is the Shadow King. We're not going to really see him. He's here right now. He's been here the whole time. Number 7, Juggernaut. Kane Marco made his first comic book appearance in X-Men issue 12. Kane and Charles Xavier were serving together in the same unit, but when Kane was under fire, he ran off to take cover in a nearby cave. That cave was actually home to the lost temple of Sidorak. So Kane grabbed this glowing ruby from the lap of an idol, read the inscription, and possessed the power of the Crimson Bands of Sidorak, becoming a human Juggernaut. And then an explosion went off and Kane the Juggernaut was trapped under the rubble and Xavier took off. He got out of there. So after Kane dug himself out, he destroyed an entire village with the previous man who had held the Juggernaut mantle, Jin Taiko, getting taken out as well. I mean, we've literally seen him rip Deadpool in half, and if Deadpool's coming to the MCU, I really hope Juggernaut will as well. After all, last time we saw him in Deadpool 2 at the end of the movie, he was crawling out of that pool. He wasn't actually dead. He was just a little bit injured after Colossus laid him out with the help of some well-placed wires. Number 6, Strife. Making his debut in New Mutants issue 87, Strife was the clone of Nathan Summers, the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, Cable. So we just saw Cable as a new main character slash villain in Deadpool 2, and he was played by Josh Brolin. So I don't think he'll be coming to the MCU. Or at least if he does, they may have to do it with this way, with Strife. That way they can bend the original story and use alternate futures however they please, with the character more or less staying true to the comics. He's a clone of Cable from the future. He has this bad armor, he's a telepathic and telekinetic mutant, and Cable, who has devoted his psionic powers to basically ensure that this techno-organic virus doesn't get his right side as well, Strife doesn't need to worry about that, so he's OP. He's an OG who is OP. The MCU could for sure use Strife. The timelines are getting quite intricate, so it can be explainable, and we'll buy it. If Strife comes in, we'll definitely buy it. Number 5, Mr. Sinister. Dr. Nathaniel Essex made his first comic book debut in Uncanny X-Men 221. And he's not that easy to forget once you take one look at him. So in a world where Sword was taking out Vision and Hydra's doing tests to make mutants in their secret labs, I totally think Mr. Sinister could show up with the X-Men in the MCU. After all, he's obsessed with experimenting on mutants, including himself. He was obsessed with Darwin's theory of evolution, but he felt like they were shackled by too many moral constraints. So that doesn't say anything. You're like, okay, this guy's a mess. He couldn't get the funding from the Hellfire Club, or, Kickstarter wasn't around. So he got together a group that he named Marauders, and then he got them to kidnap people off the streets of London so he can experiment on them himself. He even tried to experiment on his son, who wasn't even alive. So yeah, he's a villain who likes to bring the dead back. So hey, we could always use one of those for sure. Number 4, Dark Phoenix. Jean Grey is an Omega level mutant born with telekinetic and telepathic powers. Seeing the potential in Jean's strength, the Phoenix Force attached itself to her while she was in danger during a space mission with the Fantastic Four. I mean, come on guys, it's X-Men 101. Literally, the issue you can find this in is X-Men 101. I am Phoenix. Boom. Okay, so this dark, powerful cosmic force started to change her for the worse. She ended up destroying a solar system that killed like billions of people. We just finished watching Wanda have the breakdown of a century every Friday for weeks, so we'll gladly watch Jean Grey deal with the Phoenix Force in a similar fashion. Totally. Now, with the fact that Jean Grey wasn't the one to do these evil acts and she was being used as a vessel, rings a bit too close to Wanda's story, but never say never. Number 3, Apocalypse. Making his first steps in Marvel graphic novel issue 17, it's undeniable how intimidating this Omega level mutant is. This guy is loaded with powers. He can suck the energy from you. Apocalypse can suck the energy out of anything and then use that power to shoot energy blasts, or use that power to enhance his own strength and speed. Okay, not a bad start. We could definitely use someone like that in the MCU. And just by looking at Apocalypse, you can see that he's merged with celestial technology. His armor is futuristic, it's fun. This technology is wired throughout his body and also his headquarters, making Apocalypse able to teleport at times. Self-molecular manipulation allows for him to alter his physical form. He can get big, he can get small, whatever the case. He's also a super genius, especially when it comes to advanced technology, that stuff that I mentioned earlier. Even before being modified by the celestial ship, Apocalypse was already living for thousands of years. He just goes into a coma and then heals up. I mean, talk about a beauty sleep, damn. In X-Men Age of Apocalypse from 1995, we see just how big and bad this guy can get. Oscar Isaac had a take on him in X-Men Apocalypse and it was great, that was super fun. Not as scary or big as the comics, but still a good time. So if Marvel needs a new big bad guy besides Kang, I think they should go here next. We love superhero teams fighting big bald guys. I mean, we can't get enough of it. Evidently, we'll pay to see it numerous times. Number 2, Scarlet Witch. No more mutants. Scarlet Witch, aka Wanda Maximoff, she's the daughter of Magneto and the twin brother of Quicksilver, aka Ralph Boner, aka Pietro Maximoff. Now, she was on her father's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but at one point she did join the Avengers as well, of course. She's one of Marvel's biggest heroes and she's trending every single Friday for a reason. And then in Marvel's M Day, she kind of became the ultimate evil when she spoke those 3 words, and just like that, a mass amount of mutants were depowered or killed. That large number being 986,618, give or take. Only leaving a couple hundred left on the planet. WandaVision was great because we finally got to see the Scarlet Witch. We saw this villain side to her. And I'd be happy to see more at any time, especially with more mutants now on the way. And number 1, Magneto. Of course, number 1, this is the most ideal scenario. I'd love for this to happen. He made his first appearance in X-Men 1 back in 1963. Magneto is a mutant with the ability to generate and control magnetic fields. He's a master of magnetism. He was a close friend with Professor X, but of course they came to a few disagreements over the idea that humans and mutants could coexist peacefully. And his horrible childhood makes a pretty fair point for said argument. He created the Brotherhood of Mutants and the Acolytes, and he worked with the X-Men before. When Professor X needed to leave Earth, Magneto stepped in to take his place and continued to teach his students how to use their powers. After this, he became a hero in a way, guiding the New Mutants, but again, he's one of those guys that constantly flips back and forth in the comics. And for a while, fans, including myself, were hoping that Magneto was going to be the one behind WandaVision's madness somehow, or he would come in from another universe and then explain to Wanda what's going on and be the bearer of bad news almost. I think Magneto should still be one of the first mutants introduced, especially if they go Ultimate Magneto, because he actually takes out Xavier in those comics. And also, thousands of people as well. So there's that. He would be a cool villain to come over, definitely.
Number 10. Court of Owls. The Court of Owls is a villainous and powerful group who seek to exert and wield political influence in order to shape the world as they choose. They are enemies of Batman and often use their group of highly skilled assassins known as Talons to eliminate those who stand in their way. These assassins are also immortal to an extent, as they are often imbued with a metallic alloy known as electrum, which has astounding healing properties and can even reanimate and resurrect dead tissue. The Court of Owls was created by Greg Capullo and Scott Snyder, first appearing as adversaries to Bruce Wayne in the 2011 Batman series in issue number 2. Number 9. Granny Goodness. Her name might not make her sound terrifying, but Granny Goodness is not as sweet as her name makes her out to be. She became a trainer of Darkseid's soldiers after impressing him when she herself was selected to train and become one of his elite hounds. Fans of Kingsman may find the story of how she was trained very familiar. During her training regimen, she was given a dog to train herself, who stayed with her and progressed alongside her. After bonding with the animal, whom she named Mercy, she was later instructed to kill it. Goodness refused and instead killed her trainer. When Darkseid asked her why she had done this, she revealed that Mercy was worth more than her trainer had been to Darkseid, as Goodness had trained the dog to not only be loyal to her, but to Darkseid above her. Darkseid tested the theory by ordering Mercy to kill Goodness and was impressed when he found the dog actually obeyed. Goodness of course was forced to kill Mercy, but this act would inspire Darkseid to shape and use Granny Goodness as his most reliable trainer and recruiter of soldiers, with Goodness being responsible for brainwashing those she trained and becoming the most loyal and fearless members of Darkseid's army. Number 8. Black Flash. In the comics, Black Flash acts as a symbol of death, and also sometimes as literal death for the speedsters. You see, the former Flashes and past speedsters have all been too fast for regular death to touch them, and so it seems instead they have their own version. Enter the Black Flash. The Black Flash draws power from the Speed Force like many of the other speedsters we've seen. This being is able to freeze time, but only for those who do not possess potent super speed powers. It resembles death in appearance, looking like a corpse of a zombified version of the Flash. While Black Flash has appeared in the Arrowverse, this Speed Force entity has yet to appear in the DCEU. Number 7. Mandrak the Dark Monitor. Mandrak is a pretty confusing entity, but also a fairly scary one. Mandrak was once, or is, depending on what you believe, Dax Novu. And Dax Novu was once part of the Monitor. Following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, the injuries the Monitor had suffered caused it to splinter somewhat, dividing its body and creating other, smaller monitors. Dax Novu was one of these monitors. He eventually realized that the monitors were parasitic beings who were feeding on the energies of the multiverse, slowly consuming and destroying it. He informed the other monitors of this, but was shunned for attempting to share his realization. Dax then became corrupted, turning into a dark monitor known as Mandrak. While we might eventually see the Monitor and Anti-Monitor make their way into the DCEU films, it's unlikely we'll see this dark monitor pop up anytime soon. Number 6. Anti-Monitor. Speaking of monitors, we should also quickly touch on another scary and powerful one, sort of the scary and powerful one, the Anti-Monitor. Anti-Monitor is a supremely powerful villain who threatened the very existence of the multiverse during the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. He controlled the antimatter universe, and is hell-bent on ensuring the destruction of all things. So much so that even after Anti-Monitor is defeated, Necron ended up trapping the Anti-Monitor's body, and as it was later revealed in Blackest Night, using it as a source of power for the Black Central Power Battery. While we might get a sort of Crisis-inspired storyline in the DCEU with all different alternate universes and timelines from DC in television and film being acknowledged, it's more likely that they'll go the Flashpoint route as opposed to the Crisis on Infinite Earths route. Number 5. Dr. Death. The most recent incarnation of Dr. Death from Prime Earth was only around for 5 issues, so it's not just his horrific story and appearance that will likely bar him from appearing in the DCEU. It's also just that he isn't really one of the main villains. He doesn't have as much clout. However, in the few issues we did see him in, he proved to be a terrifying villain and foe. Dr. Carl Helfern was a brilliant scientist working for Wayne Enterprises on a serum that would strengthen bones, causing them to become more durable instead of breaking when under stress. However, his failed attempts combined with other mental trauma and strain caused him to go insane. He killed his scientific team, injecting them with a failed version of the serum that caused their bones to grow until they were ripped apart. Number 4. The Corinthian. The Corinthian isn't specifically from DC directly itself, but is from an imprint of theirs that used to be known as Vertigo. Well, it's still known as Vertigo, but it no longer exists. It was discontinued, and instead we got Black Label, which is also an amazing line, but everyone was obviously still sad to see Vertigo go. One of Vertigo's most famous series was Sandman, which also featured some of DC's characters who made cameos throughout. The Corinthian, however, was not one of these, but is a character unique to the world of Sandman. While we are getting a Netflix series for Sandman in 2021, I also think it would be super cool to get some darker toned DC films. Among them, it would be cool to get some Sandman, or at least a Sandman film. Although the Corinthian might be too monstrous to actually make an appearance, even if we did get a Sandman film. He is one of the nightmares that Dream made. At one point, he escapes the dreaming and ventures out in the world, where he becomes a serial killer who pulls out and eats his victims' eyes. He himself has mouths where his eyes should be, and usually wears sunglasses to disguise his monstrous appearance. Ugh, eating eyes. Allows him to see everything that you've seen, which is, gross still. No, it's still gross. Number 3. Dr. Destiny. Speaking of Sandman, I want to talk in particular about another horrific villain who appeared there, although this one also exists as a horror and supervillain within the direct DC Comics universe as well. There he wielded a device he'd invented called the Materiopticon. This device was later retconned to be Morpheus's Dreamstone, which his mother gave him, when Dr. D appeared in Sandman. Dr. Destiny was hypnotized by the Justice League to prevent him from dreaming and becoming too powerful. As a result, he was driven insane and ended up in Arkham Asylum, wasting away, becoming a skeletal version of himself. When he escaped, he wreaked havoc at an all-night 24-hours diner where he tortured the patrons and staff before Dream finally caught up with him. Thank goodness, cause that issue, woo, it's crazy. Number 2. Professor Pig. Professor Pig's real name is Laszlo Valentin. He is a former Spiral agent who went insane and became obsessed with curing people of their individualism in order to perfect them. When the crime syndicate temporarily took over Earth, Gotham City was overtaken by the criminals who ruled in Batman's absence. Pig himself used the hospital as his own HQ and worked from there, kidnapping civilians, sedating them, and transforming them with strange, cosmetic, and mutilating procedures, using involuntary patients to create his own horrific Dollatron army. He was created by Grant Morrison and Andy Kubert, and also first appeared in 2011's Batman series. Number 1. Jane Doe. Jane Doe is a serial killer who served time at Arkham Asylum. She appears to not have any skin of her own, appearing to be covered in exposed muscle tissue. Instead, she covets the skin and lives of others. While she doesn't appear to have any specific superpowers, it has been implied that she might be possible of shapeshifting. She often gets to know her victims before killing them and adopting their identities, sometimes even wearing their preserved skin as a suit, instead of simply using makeup to disguise herself. For example, I could be Jane Doe right now and you wouldn't even know. That's how good she is at it. Oh my goodness. Number 10. Man-Bat. The Man-Bat is not always a villain of Batman's. He has been known to sometimes be an ally as well. But when Dr. Kirk Langstrom is in his Man-Bat form, he is always horrifying. So horrifying that the closest thing we got to him was in one of Batman's nightmares from Batman v Superman in the DCEU. However, this wasn't really specified to be Man-Bat specifically. Dr. Langstrom aimed to create a serum to help the deaf and blind, but accidentally made a serum that also transformed anyone who used it into a giant bat-like creature. Both he and his wife suffer from its effects at one point, becoming the Man-Bat and She-Bat respectively. It would be cool to see a horror-style Batman film featuring these two monstrous and sometimes villainous characters. Number 9. Solomon Grundy. While he's appeared in lots of animated films, Solomon Grundy has yet to make his debut in the live-action world of the DCEU. This could be because of his monstrous appearance. Solomon Grundy is a zombie-like villain who sometimes ends up as a hero depending on the circumstances. He has a Frankenstein-type vibe to him as well, which likely makes him too monster-like for the likes of the DCEU. Although there are so many horror-inspired characters and villains in DC Comics that would be cool to see if that genre made its way more into the films. Horror DC, I would watch those movies. Number 8. Hugo Strange. Hugo Strange has a place in the television series Gotham, where he is played by B.D. Wong, and is depicted as the chief of psychiatry at Arkham Asylum. But we have yet to see the insane mad scientist make an appearance in the DC Extended Universe. Because he is often closely tied these days to Arkham Asylum both in the comics and in the Batman video games, it would be kind of hard to introduce this madman who has a tendency to experiment on patients and transform them into monsters into the DCEU without first introducing the famed Asylum. Hugo is a formidable and frightening Batman foe, not just because of how insane he is, but because of how brilliant he is too.
It's a perfect plan. With this machine, I can imagine Batman to be anyone I choose. And these fools will pay a fortune for it.
He was even able to use his smarts and deductive reasoning to uncover Batman's true identity. Number 7. Mr. Mixie Pizyelik. So, Mr. Mixie might not be horrifying to look at. He's kinda silly looking, truth be told, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be scared of him. He has more power than you can possibly imagine, and in fact, anything that he can imagine can come to pass, should he will it. The only limit to his reality-altering powers are the limitations of his own imagination. Like Batman's Joker, he has at times claimed to be the ultimate Superman foe. In one story to prove this, he even killed all of Superman's enemies and allies just to prove how evil he was. Mr. Mixie also forced Superman to kill him as well, forcing Superman to break his own moral code. Ooh. Talk about being on Joker's terrifying level of ultimate villainy. Number 6. James Gordon Jr. He might not be on Mr. Mixie's level in terms of his power set, but James Gordon Jr. is one terrifying and creepy villain. As his name implies, he is related to Commissioner Gordon and is in fact his son. Surprisingly, James is not like his dad and grows up instead to become a psychotic serial killer, exhibiting early warning signs from a young age that there is something very wrong with him. He used to pick apart and torture animals and was suspected as being involved in the disappearance of one of Barbara's friends, Bess Keller, though nothing was ever proven. He ends up returning to Gotham and is revealed to be a full-out serial killer who enjoys torturing his victims to death in Black Mirror. Later on, he ends up joining the Suicide Squad and becomes the team's strategy analyzer. Man, I would not want to work with James Gordon Jr. on the Suicide Squad. I'd be like, ugh. No thanks. Number 5. Papa Midnight. Papa Midnight is a villain to John Constantine for the most part. Sometimes he's an ally, but more often he's not, as the man is obsessed with power and is a pretty bad dude. Papa Midnight grew up in Trenchtown, Jamaica. Born Linton Midnight, from a young age he became inspired by tales of dark magic that his parents had told him. He betrayed a group of slaves, conning them into believing that they would be protected if they rebelled, which led to their deaths, and later went on to sell his sister's soul into demon slavery, so that he could achieve more power for himself through using her soul as a barter chip, selling it to the demons of hell. Ooh. Considering how violent and insidious Papa Midnight is, we likely won't be seeing him in the DCEU, although he has managed to make an appearance in the CW Arrowverse, which is pretty impressive. Number 4. Crib. How does one even make a villain like Crib in the DCEU, just from a visual standpoint? Like, ooh, that'd be a lot of effects, I think. Crib is a member of the Sinestro Corps. She is described as being an alien hag and is 100% something out of a nightmare. Lots of Baba Yaga vibes here as well. However, instead of being associated with eating children, as Baba Yaga sometimes is, Crib's purpose is to kidnap the newly born children of Green Lanterns who are also parents. Crib will even go to the lengths of giving her pregnant victims 4 cesareans in order to secure their children. Ugh. She keeps the kidnapped newborns in her hunchback, which looks like a creepy bone crib, and promptly kills the parents of any children whom she has taken away. What's more disturbing is it's never explained why Crib has this compulsion. It's just something she feels inspired to do. I guess she doesn't think Green Lanterns make for great parents? She's like, I'll be a way better parent to these babies with my weird bone crib. Super qualified. Number 3. Dollmaker. Dollmaker has a horrific origin, which makes it hard to introduce him without going full horror film mode. When Barton Mathis was young, he would go camping with his father, who it turns out was a serial killer. While camping, Barton would not only witness his father kill people, but also commit acts of cannibalism. He also saw his father killed when apprehended by the police. Years later, Mathis would grow up to be a gifted but deranged surgeon who was obsessed with using his victims' body parts to craft dolls. He wears a mask made of human skin and was the one who helped Joker to remove his face during the lead up to the death of the family storyline. Number 2. A Black Lantern Corps. One of the most terrifying villain groups, both appearance-wise and in terms of their threat level, is the Black Lantern Corps. Of course, this would be a hard supervillain group to introduce, being that we'd likely need Green Lanterns to be on the scene to help explain, well, just who the Black Lantern Corps are and why we should care about them. After all, you can't defeat the Black Lantern Corps anyways without the entire emotional spectrum of lanterns assembled to help create that White Lantern power. This threat might also just be too huge and horrific to make an appearance due to the sheer size of their numbers. In the Blackest Night storyline, they were like an overwhelmingly sized zombie apocalypse level of threat, killing heroes and resurrecting them to join their deadly ranks. Number 1. Batman Who Laughs. It might be a little too confusing for the DCEU to introduce the Batman Who Laughs, as that would mean they'd likely have to involve the dark multiverse somewhere in their films, and the dark multiverse is likely too dark even for DC to make that happen on the big screen. The Batman Who Laughs is an alternate version of Batman who was infected by Joker venom after being pushed too far by the villain, causing him to lash out and kill the Joker, snapping his neck. This caused Batman to become infected, driving him insane and causing him to take down his own world's Justice League and kill his own Bat family, save for Damian Wayne, who he convinced to join him. He's one of the biggest bads in DC's current storylines.
And at number 10, Victor Zsasz. Victor Zsasz is a serial killer that we've only seen adapted into live action once, in the Gotham series. And to be frank, he's really not all that scary compared to his comic or even video game counterparts. Every time Zsasz kills a victim, he gives himself a new mark on his flesh. His skin is covered in scars, one for each of the lives that he's taken. And by the looks of it, he's arguably one of Gotham's most efficient killers. He had been born wealthy, but after his parents died, he gambled all of his money away and fell into a depression in which he realized that life was pointless. So he decided that he'd go around murdering people for fun instead, something that became a full-time job of his. Moving on to number 9, Jason Todd. For us to see Jason Todd exist in the world of the Batman, that would mean we would need to witness something else. One of Batman's Robins getting murdered, in one of the most brutal ways possible thanks to the Joker, with a crowbar after experiencing a severe beatdown from the Clown Prince of Crime's thugs. That would definitely be a bold move, and seeing Jason Todd come back from the dead would be quite frightful. While we don't think Jason as Red Hood would make for a terrifying villain in general, it's all about the context in this case. And when it comes to Jason Todd, his backstory is one that we do not want to relive anytime soon up on the big screen. Moving on to number 8, The Mad Monk. The Mad Monk, also known simply as The Monk, is one of Batman's earliest foes, having first appeared in Detective Comics issue 31 back in 1939, created by Bob Kane and Gardner Fox. Initially, he was depicted as a vampire who wore a red monk outfit. Later on, it's established that Batman believes the monk isn't actually a vampire, but rather uses hypnosis to manipulate his victims and foes. The monk was then reinvented decades later, into a post-Civil War plantation owner in New Orleans who was subjected to a voodoo ritual by his vengeful ex-slaves. He ends up transforming into an undead version of himself, and later, when encountering Batman, would turn the Dark Knight into a vampire too, causing Batman to have to be exorcised thanks to a serum. Up next, number 7, the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow's jam is literally fear. He uses a toxin that causes his victims to see their worst fears, their most dreadful nightmares, as if they were real and right in front of them. While the Scarecrow has appeared in previous adaptations, specifically Batman Begins, there's always the chance that he would return to this new franchise. But we'd hope that this time around the scare factor would be amped up. Christopher Nolan did a good job with the character, but Scarecrow's abilities could really be pushed further on the big screen, even to the likes of some of the terrifying images that we saw in the Batman Arkham Asylum video game, which may be one of the best boss battles that the series has ever seen. Moving on to number 6, the Court of Owls. While we think that the Court of Owls would make for a fantastic and captivating antagonist in the new Batman film, we also think that their corruption that lurks around every corner of Gotham City may be a bit too intense for a film that relaunches the Batman franchise. But hey, prove us wrong. The Court of Owls first appeared in the New 52 back in Batman Volume 2 Issue 3, which led up to an insane conflict in which they held Batman hostage and the hero had to face his innermost darkness while going mad and trying to escape their labyrinth. They are an organized crime group and secret society that have existed in Gotham since colonial times, kidnapping children performers from the circus and transforming them into assassins. They've got their own army of assassins known as the Talons, who can even be brought back from the dead. So all in all, secret society with links all over Gotham City who have undead assassins. Yeah, pretty scary. And at number 5, the Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs is arguably one of the Dark Knight's most threatening foes. He's essentially the combination of the Joker and Batman. All of the Joker's desire for chaos, destruction, and insanity mixed with Bruce Wayne's intellect, strategizing, and technological savvy. It's a killer combination, quite literally. One that occurs in the Dark Multiverse when Bruce Wayne kills the Joker and the Joker's body lets out a toxin that our hero then inhales. He begins to lose his mind, kills off the members of the Bat family, enslaves his Robins, turning them into rabid dogs, then kills off the rest of the Justice League before teaming up with an evil demonic entity to take out the Prime Timeline Batman and destroy the regular multiverse. Yeah, dude is an ambitious villain. He was so popular amongst fans that after the Dark Knight's Metal event in which he first debuted, he stuck around for a solo series that pins him up against Batman in one of the most intense conflicts that Bruce has ever faced. Moving on to number 4, Dr. Death. Oh, what a name. Dr. Death is by far one of the most physically terrifying villains to ever hit the panels of a Batman comic. He is also one of the oldest. Debuting initially in Detective Comics issue 29 back in 1939, the character was Batman's first reoccurring foe, who back in the Golden Age developed a death chemical agent from a pollen extract. He uses this chemical agent to try to extort money from the wealthy citizens of Gotham. He gets real scary though in the New 52, when a new version of the villain appears in Batman issue 25 as part of Batman's Zero Year. This time, he was a disgruntled scientist employed by Wayne Enterprises, who ended up murdering several people with a serum which causes uncontrollable bone growth. It's with this retcon that he gets his new upgraded horrific appearance, which is a result of him having tested the serum on himself. Just imagine coming face to face with that in the middle of the night. Yeah. Yikes. And at 3, Cornelius Stirk. Stirk is very similar to the Scarecrow in the sense that he uses fear to manipulate his victims. His abilities allow him to make others see him as someone else in order to trick them and get close to them. He creates hallucinations via telepathy. But here is where it gets creepy. Stirk believes that he needs the nutrients and hormones of human hearts in order to stay alive, and the best way to consume human hearts is to prepare them with norepinephrine, which occurs by inducing fear into the victim prior to their death. He was first sent to Arkham Asylum at the age of 16 for trying to kill a classmate, but manipulated his way out of the asylum after being certified sane thanks to the use of his powers on his doctors. He also isn't a big time villain, so the chances of him actually making it into a Batman movie kinda slim. And at number 2, M-Plate. M-Plate may not be as well known of a villain as our previous number, but he's arguably physically more frightening. M-Plate is a mutant who physically looks like an emaciated corpse with purple artery-like veins running across his gray flesh. He is not a looker, that's for damn sure. M-Plate first came to be in Generation X issue 1 back in 1994, and when his mutant powers first manifested, he was overcome with hunger and killed his mom because of it, causing his father to kick him out. M-Plate, who back then was known as Marius St. Croix, sought out the dark arts out of a desire for more power. He would later be rejected by his sister as well, who he would magically trap inside of the form of a mute creature with razor-sharp diamond-hard skin, Penance. While he's only fought the X-Men a handful of times, his powers are not to be taken lightly. He has the ability to siphon mutant energy from bone marrow of mutants. If he siphons all of their energy, they die. While he's feeding from them, he cancels out their powers and often takes on some of his victims' attributes. If he feeds on them multiple times, he gains their powers permanently. So he's basically a mutant vampire. In addition to this, when he feeds, he achieves a measure of psychic control over his victims' minds, making them his subordinates. Scratch that, he is the mutant Dracula. And finally, in at number 1, the Shadow King. The Shadow King is one of Charles Xavier's consistent foes. He was a human mutant from Egypt with vast telepathic powers, which he used for evil, eventually taking on the alias of the Shadow King. Through retconning, he was made into an ancient evil entity. Aside from his bone-chilling appearance, this character scores the top spot on our list thanks to his possession abilities. While in the astral plane, he can possess other beings and control them. So he's basically like a monster out of a horror movie. He's an astral entity who preys on the bodies of highly skilled and powerful psychics, which he then uses to enslave others with. In the Shadow King's native form, he cannot be harmed physically, and he has lived for over a millennia. Generally, the Shadow King is depicted as a large creature with purplish skin, glowing red eyes, sharp claws, and even sharper teeth. Luckily, in order to exist in reality, the Shadow King needs a host, and if that host is killed, it will disperse the Shadow King's astral essence, which can take up to months or years for him to re-manifest in his astral form again. Thank God.
Number 10. Legion. Legion, aka David Haller, is the son of Charles Xavier and Gabriel Haller. He first debuted back in 1985 in New Mutants number 25. He is an extremely powerful mutant. Legion has a whole host of abilities, too many to name almost. Chief amongst them, telepathy, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, reality warping, and so much more. The only thing, David's not really fully in control of his powers. And a mega level mutant, when his powers first manifested, it was during a terrorist situation, and he actually ended up absorbing the mind of the lead terrorist, Jamail Tarami, which led to his mind splintering and him developing multiple personalities, each of whom controlled a different aspect of his powers. Legion started off as a villain of the X-Men, as he was quickly possessed by the Shadow King, as he was rendered catatonic shortly after his first true manifestation of power. David is also responsible for the Age of Apocalypse timeline, when he went back in time attempting to kill Magneto but killed his father instead, creating that horrifying branch of reality. Part of what made Legion so dangerous was his insanity and unpredictability as a result. However, over the years, David has metamorphosized into somewhat of a hero and has gained more control over his powers, partially through training and partially through tech. However, with a character like Legion, there's always the potential that his grip on his personalities could slip, and he could find himself a menace to the X-Men and the world once more. Also, watch Legion on FX, it's great. Number 9. Danger. Danger is the manifestation and personification of the Danger Room. Now, even if one is only casually acquainted with the X-Men, they most likely know of the Danger Room, the training space that pits the X-Men against all kinds of, well, dangerous obstacles to hone their skills. However, what they may not be aware of is this plot. Due to lots of backstory, Xavier found himself updating the Danger Room with Shi'ar tech. However, as he did, it posed him a question. Where am I? This led Charles to realize the room was sentient. However, he also needed a space for the X-Men to train, so he decided the best thing to do was cover it up and tell no one. The Danger Room was then utilized and destroyed when the mansion was attacked, the various times that's happened. And after one such time, Danger began to seize control of the other machines in an attempt to escape and forge a body. First, Danger coaxed a student to suicide, then managed to build a female body, take on and defeat the X-Men in her quest to kill her father, Xavier. Danger spent years seeking revenge, building new bodies or possessing others, like the Omega Sentinel. She was made all the more dangerous by her intimate knowledge of the team's weaknesses and fighting styles. However, ultimately this character became an ally to the X-Men. Sometimes you just gotta get over all that dark stuff Xavier does when writers want to introduce conflict into the story. That's how it goes. No matter how scary you are, turn good, you get bumped down the list. Number 8. Arcade. Arcade first appeared in Marvel Team-Up Volume 1, number 65 back in 1978. Now, Arcade has no powers, but you don't need them to be a scary or a credible threat. Arcade has a genius-level intellect and a penchant for murder that has led him down the path to be a hitman. But he doesn't just kill people. No, he makes them work their way through elaborate arenas of his own design, in his amusement park-inspired murder world. Arcade never seems to have a hard time kidnapping people either. You're living your life one minute, next, boom, you're in murder world. While Arcade has gone up against many Marvel heroes, he has had many notable encounters with the X-Men. When possible, he likes to get people in pairs to make more interesting, like Gambit and Wolverine. The rooms will be designed with a myriad of traps and dangers to test the specific occupant's skill set and mental fortitude. Now, some may be like, scary, but you may change your tune if you woke up kidnapped in Murder World. Number 7. David Moreau. David Moreau is yet another normal human, but is on here for the effect he has had on the X-Men verse. Moreau is also known by the name the G-Engineer. He first appeared in Uncanny X-Men number 236 back in 1988, and was allied with the island of Genosha, a land whose prosperity had been built on the backs of mutant slavery, which had been made possible thanks to Moreau's invention of a mind control device. He also invented the mutate process, wherein 13-year-olds were tested for the X gene, and if it was found, they were turned into mutates, with their memories erased and rendered completely obedient. Now, Moreau can't get all the villain cred here. His mission was helped along by tech given to him by a villain who was in part 2, the Sugar Man. The Sugar Man had obtained a version of this tech from his reality, that being the Age of Apocalypse, and that version of Mr. Sinister. Still horrifying stuff, and a threat to not just the X-Men, but mutants everywhere. Number 6. Nimrod. Don't let the name fool you. Nimrod is a force to be reckoned with. First appearing in 1985 in Uncanny X-Men number 191. Nimrod comes from the now famous Days of Future Past storyline, a descendant of the robotic hunting machines, the Sentinels. His name is actually a biblical one that means mighty hunter. The fact that it translates to a playground insult years later, that's not his fault. Nimrod was created by the Sentinels to be the ultimate mutant hunting weapon, and he is nigh invulnerable. After some time travel, he decides that he doesn't need to eliminate all mutants, just the X-Men, powerful ones who are outlaws, who have an impact on the timeline. It's very Terminator-esque, and that's terrifying. That scene in the first Terminator where it's coming down the hall towards them dragging its foot and it seems slow, but then it pans out and you see how fast it's really moving, that still messes me up. Number 5. Archangel. Warren Worthington III gets to be so high up because of just one impact his villainous turn made on X-Men history, and it's a great storyline. Warren was one of the original X-Men, a founding member from all the way back in X-Men number 1 in 1963. Warren always had a complicated relationship with his mutation, the wings of an angel, or at least it seems that way now. At first he was a stereotypical air character, then he got broody when things got angsty in the 80s. Warren's descent towards villainy began with X-Factor, a group Warren was backing, which ends up getting viewed as mutant hunters for hire, and after he is exposed as the backer, his wings are mutilated and develop gangrene, leading to them needing to be amputated. Warren is devastated and commandeers a jet that has been sabotaged to blow up. He doesn't know that. Before it does, he is transported away by Apocalypse, who offers him a spot as a horseman. Apocalypse performs extensive genetic alterations that change Warren's appearance and give him metallic wings, and for a time, he was the horseman Death. Manipulated by Apocalypse, he turns harshly on his friends. As Archangel, he was a force to be reckoned with, and his path towards redemption and occasional slips back make for good reading. The design is great, those sharp metallic wings, and again, he's someone who knows the team's weaknesses. He is good currently, which, well, bleh. Give me back my Archangel. Number 4. Mastermind. We're talking about the first villain to have that name, who was instrumental in the Phoenix arc. This character first debuted in 1964 in X-Men number 4, and for our purposes we need Jason Wyngarde. Mastermind has the power to cast illusions, vivid and realistic ones, that he uses to manipulate people to his whims. He can also alter people's senses, how they feel, what they see, and most importantly how they perceive him. He likes to up his hands in this game. What makes him so formidable is that he can even affect powerful telepaths, such as Xavier and most notably Jean Grey. This occurred during his association with the Hellfire Club. He at first uses his powers to pose as Nikos and initiate a romance with the help of Emma Frost. He is then able to convince Jean that it was Victorian times and they were married, and that she was the Black Queen. Mastermind doesn't make it, but his legacy lives on, as does his creepy mind manipulation plot. Scary, to be made to think you live in a bodice ripper. Mental manipulation is scary stuff. Number 3. Strife. Okay, so some explanations, but the Cliff Notes version. Strife is a clone of Cable, who first appeared in 1990 in New Mutants number 86. Strife was raised by Apocalypse, in the future, for the purposes of being a host body. However, Apocalypse decides against it once he realizes that Strife is a clone, as he thought he had the real Cable. But he was wrong. Strife's contribution to this list is the Legacy virus, which was first Legacy 1, then Legacy 2, but would eventually mutate into Legacy 3. The virus was set to target mutants when their X gene was activated, which would ultimately cause the body to stop being able to produce healthy cells and lead to death. But before the end, the victim's powers would go haywire, causing much damage to those around them. Strife took his time perfecting this virus, that's why there's multiple versions, except for 3, which was a mutated version that could infect everybody. Number 2. Cassandra Nova. This is a more recent character, appearing in 2001 during the new X-Men number 21, as an antagonist to the X-Men and Charles Xavier specifically. So bear with me, because it's gonna get a little zany. Cassandra Nova is Charles Xavier's twin, sorta. But she was conceived without a body, and copied one from Charles in the womb. However, Charles sensed her terrifying thoughts, again in the womb, so he strangled her, and she was stillborn, but her essence survived. Eventually she was able to build an all-new body. She is Charles's opposite, a dark mirror. Her first act to announce herself to the X-Men was to kill 16 million mutants on Genosha in a mass mutant genocide. As a Mumadrai, Nova was meant to have to wrestle with Charles for control of his body, but thanks to his mutant abilities and hence hers, she could build her own. She has psychic powers compared to Charles, plus telekinesis, phasing ability, the ability to create psionic armor and block attacks, and a hate-on for the X-Men. It's just a lot. And number 1. You guys have been waiting for it. You're excited. It's Proteus. Proteus debuted in 1979 in Uncanny X-Men number 125. Proteus was meant to be one of the strongest mutants ever conceived. Born as Kevin McTaggart, he is the son of longtime X-Men ally Moira McTaggart. However, Kevin's powers are so intense they cause him to crave energy to replace what he has expended. In fact, he's actually made of pure energy. His mother had to keep him in containment to protect him and others, but he eventually escaped and put his powers to use, which includes body possession, so he can hop from host to host. He also has psionic energy composition and reality warping abilities that he can actually control. Before he was known as Proteus, he was known simply as Mutant X. So because of the fact that he exists in a pure energy state, the bodies that he hops into, he uses them up pretty quickly, and Proteus normally just burns them out. He could leave before he kills them, but he just doesn't. He also has access to all their memories even after he's left, and has hopped into some of the X-Men's bodies. He's been known to melt buildings, reverse gravity, stretch people into liquid, and more. Basically whatever he can imagine, he can do. He eventually became able to possess multiple individuals at the same time and travel interdimensionally. He's even attempted to bring the astral plane into normal reality. His powers are out of control. The fact that they defeat him at all is a minor miracle each time. Proteus is terrifying in the scope of his power and the fact that really you can't get rid of him.
And at number 9, Krakoa. Krakoa is one of the X-Men's earliest villains, having appeared in Giant Size X-Men issue 1 in 1975. There's been 2 versions of Krakoa over the years, with the first being the villainous one. It appeared initially as a small island in the Pacific Ocean that was located near a nuclear bombing test site. The radiation from that test site mutated the island's ecosystem, which altered the island into a hive mind entity in 1945, something that Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos witnessed. They encountered much of the island's intelligence and established a peaceful treaty in exchange for keeping the island's existence a complete secret. Now flash forward to 1975. Krakoa decides it's hungry and it wants to feed on the life force of mutants, because I guess mutants are tastier than humans. It kills a young mutant team and later captures the original iteration iteration of X-Men. This is what causes Professor Xavier to create the second wave of X-Men, the team that consists of Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Thunderbird, Sunfire, and Banshee, all to save the first iteration. Polaris eventually launches Krakoa into outer space, and later it becomes captured by the Stranger. Now this Krakoa is perhaps one of the most physically intimidating entities that the mutant team has ever fought. It is a literal monstrous island. The second version of it though, in case you're wondering, is much more benevolent, having been grown by a member of the Hellfire Club but wanting to redeem itself with the X-Men and become one of them. It ends up becoming a part of the school and even helps the X-Men financially by growing diamonds on a tree that it produces. Man, imagine having a friend who could grow diamonds on trees for you. It's the dream. And at number 8, Sauron. Don't be confused by its name. This is no Middle-earth Sauron. Luckily. Sauron of the Marvel Universe is quite different, despite being evil and having taken the name Sauron after the Lord of the Rings villain. Sauron is the alter ego of Khal Lycos, who has a Jekyll and Hyde relationship of sorts with this humanoid pterodactyl form of his. He's essentially an energy vampire who often lives within the prehistoric jungle known as the Savage Land. First appearing in this form in X-Men issue 60 back in 1969, Sauron was initially meant to be a giant bat-like creature, but back in those times, the comics code authority was still in effect, somewhat, and his creators Roy Thomas and Neil Adams inquired with the organization, who suggested that the character's vampiric traits would be in violation of the code. So instead of going with something that resembled a giant vampire bat, which was banned according to the code, they ended up opting out for a form that looked more like a pterodactyl. Anywho, what can Sauron do aside from look absolutely terrifying? Well, he's got all the superhuman fixings: strength, speed, stamina, durability, and intelligence. He flies, duh, has hypnotic eyes, fire breath, razor-sharp claws, and most importantly, he can absorb life forces and mutant powers, and can sense mutants too. In addition to this, he can gain the powers of other mutants. Once, while battling against the Avengers and the X-Men, he was shot in the head by the second Black Widow, but survived thanks to having absorbed Wolverine's healing factor. And at 7, the Wendigo. The Wendigo is most well known in Marvel Comics for being the first foe of Wolverine's, the enemy in which Wolverine and the Hulk take on together. Based on the Wendigo legend of the Algonquin people, it's a large beastly creature with superhuman strength, stamina, durability, and agility. It has enhanced speed, hardened and sharp talons, and a regenerative healing factor. It's found in the woods of northern Canada and is the result of a curse that takes place under very specific conditions, primarily when a human in the forests feed on human flesh. Any of you familiar with the recent video game title Until Dawn may be familiar with the legends, although the Wendigo of Marvel Comics looks quite different than the video game's representation. Now, over the years, the Wendigo has taken on its fair share of mutants, including Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and the members of Alpha Flight. And the Wendigo isn't just one character either. Various different Wendigo have appeared over the years, all formerly humans who partook in cannibalism and have become these wretched creatures. And at 6, Predator X. Predator X first hit the panels of Marvel Comics back in 2007 in New X-Men issue 34. It is a grotesque beast, reptile-like, with superhuman strength and speed, sharp claws and teeth, toxic saliva, accelerated hearing, and its body is covered in non-toxic inorganic mercury. That latter bit means it is highly resistant to physical damage and can draw materials in the environment surrounding it to help reform itself. So why is it scary? If you aren't already kind of freaked out by it? Well, it can track mutants on their genetic signature and is pretty much tireless, meaning it can track its prey relentlessly until it succeeds, wearing down its target for as long as necessary. It can run at speeds of 199 kilometers an hour for a total of 19 hours straight before having to slow down. Luckily, its insides are not as durable as its outsides. Wolverine managed to kill it by tearing it apart from the inside out with his claws. But fun fact, it killed one of the villains that we mentioned on our part 1 list, Peeper, who it devoured on the side of a road. It's vicious to say the least. Predator X was created thanks to Stryker, who, prior to dying, requested that a living weapon be made in order to combat the coming of a mutant Antichrist, aka Hope Summers. Moving on to number 5, Sugar Man. Sugar Man is by no means a good X-Men villain, but he is definitely a terrifying one to take in. First debuting in the Age of Apocalypse timeline, Earth 295, in Generation Next issue 2 in 1995, Sugar Man would manage to sneak his way out of that reality and onto Earth 616, when bombs are blowing the crap out of 295 as a last resort means to be rid of Apocalypse. Sugar Man, aside from being hideous and offensive to the eyes, is an expert biologist and geneticist. He has 4 arms, superhuman strength, razor-sharp teeth and claws, an indefinitely long bioelectric tongue, ew, an enhanced sense of smell, and has the ability to alter his body mass and size, which is actually how he sneaked his way over to 616, by hiding in Colossus's boot of all places. He's responsible for a handful of deaths on Earth 295, and when he arrives on 616, he ends up forcibly enslaving hundreds of mutants for the magistrates. The reason why he really ends up on this list? Just Just look at them. From scary looks to scary intentions, moving on to number 4, we have the Reavers. The Reavers are a team of criminal cyborgs who first debuted in Uncanny X-Men issue 229 back in May of 1988, created by Chris Claremont and Mark Silvestri. The Reavers, led by a man named Donald Pierce, are dedicated to the destruction of mutants, and specifically the destruction of Wolverine. Initially they were a gang of looters who operated in Australia, but began to branch out when they used the mutant gateway to teleport across the globe in order to pull off more sophisticated robberies. The X-Men stopped them, with only a handful of the Reavers escaping that first encounter, later reassembling under Pierce, who takes the team into a more militarized direction, using them as an assassination squadron of sorts bent on taking vengeance on the X-Men. They've done some pretty messed up stuff over the years, including capturing Wolverine, torturing him, and crucifying him. They're an extremist team bent on eliminating mutant kind, humans who have become cyborgs as part of the cause. And they've even stirred up trouble in alternate timelines too. In Age of Apocalypse they were a band of human traitors who served the titular villain, and in the Ultimate Marvel universe they are human gladiators who have undergone surgery to become cyborgs, all for the purpose of hunting down mutants on live television. That's messed up. I mean, imagine running into a team of extremists like that who embrace technology in order to wipe out a race. Yeah, they're scary because they're a foe of the X-Men who are a little bit more realistic antagonists compared to some of their other enemies. We also got to see the Reavers make a cinematic debut in Logan, and needless to say they're pretty darn scary in their live action adaptation as well. And at 3, the Purifiers. The Purifiers are one step up from the Reavers, and are unsettling for very similar reasons. They're a paramilitary and terrorist organization, also created by Chris Claremont, that debuted in Marvel graphic novel issue 5, X-Men God Loves, Man Kills. And they are led by none other than Reverend William Stryker, who is their founder. So their whole shtick is that they're Christian fundamentalists who believe that they are fighting a holy war against mutants. They see mutants as the children of the devil and therefore need to be exterminated. In their first appearance, they abducted Charles Xavier and several members of the X-Men team, killed mutant children, fought against Magneto, and almost executed Kitty Pryde. Luckily for her, one of Stryker's guards grew horrified with his actions and shot Stryker, resulting in Kitty getting away and Stryker being sent to prison. That wasn't the last of them though. Even after Stryker no longer led the group, other successors took over the leadership mantle, including his own son Jason Stryker. Later on, the Purifiers got their hands on Warren Worthington III's wings and used blood from them, extracted Apocalypse's techno-organic strain inside of them in order to graft it and then give to the Purifiers, giving them their own wings, a specific subgroup that would be called the Choir, whose whole MO was to, I quote, strike down Satan's spawn with God's own might. Archangel would later massacre all of the Choir minus 3 members. And at number 2, Mr. Sinister. Mr. Sinister is one of the most notorious X-Men villains. Sinister, aka Nathaniel Essex, first debuted as the employer of the assassin group the Marauders, mentioned in the Uncanny X-Men issue 212 in 1986, but first seen in the Uncanny X-Men issue 221, almost a whole year later. Not only is his aesthetic unsettling, but he's also capable of some really terrifying stuff. He's telepathic, telekinetic, has superhuman strength, durability, and longevity, can create concussive energy projections, and, potentially scariest of all, can manipulate his body on a molecular level. Born in 1859, he was obsessed with Darwin's theories and was considered an unorthodox biologist, conducting immoral experiments that would make him an outcast amongst his peers. He even dug up his dead firstborn child to experiment on it. After awakening Apocalypse, the villain would painfully transform him into an ageless being, with Essex taking on the name Sinister, which was the last thing that his wife called him on her deathbed. It's a wee bit masochistic, isn't it? And finally, in our number 1 spot, the Phoenix Force. One of the most terrifying foes that the X-Men have ever faced off against is the Phoenix Force, an entity that is an immortal and immutable manifestation of the universal force of life and passion, born of the void between states of being, the nexus of all psionic energy which does, has, and ever will exist within the Marvel multiverse. The Phoenix Force requires a host, and it manifested within Jean Grey, who, when losing control of it, became the Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix has a vast amount of abilities, is able to manipulate matter, energy, and life force, and has cosmic awareness, all of which makes Jean's Dark Phoenix incredibly powerful and threatening. In many cases, in alternate realities, Jean has completely wiped out the planet or consumed the universe when not stopped by the X-Men. And while much of the Phoenix saga has been retconned, along with Jean dying and coming back to life, and then dying and coming back to life again, the Phoenix Force has still proven to be rather deadly regardless. Over the years in the comics, the Phoenix Force has proven capable of taking on powerful foes like the Beyonder, absorbing stars for energy that creates supernovas capable of wiping out entire planets, and even flat out wiping out all of existence in What If issue 27 volume 1. I don't know about you guys, but to me that's scary as hell. And at number 10, Barnacle. Barnacle was a character who first was introduced in 1999 in X-Men Magneto War Issue 1. He's a mutant terrorist who has one of the nastiest powers, moisture solidification. He can initiate a chemical reaction that turns moisture into a solid shell, which he uses for various things. It can contain a person in a constructive turtle-like shell with their own bodily fluids, ew. He can create indestructible armor for himself, and he can spray a stream of hardened barnacle crust through the air, also ew, because it most likely comes from the moisture in his own body. Super gross. He once tried to screw with Storm and her claustrophobia by encasing her in a hardened shell, but luckily Nightcrawler was there to intervene. Dude is just flat out nasty. And at number 9, Deadbolt. Deadbolt is another smaller villain to make our list, and aesthetically is a very different kind of scary in comparison to our last number. Deadbolt is a living skeleton, contained with an energy field, who could remove pieces of his bones to use as a weapon. His body would immediately regenerate if he did, meaning I guess he's got an arsenal of bone weapons for eternity. He was a member of the Dark Riders, an organization that worked for X-Men Big Bad Genesis. He was initially seemingly killed off by Wolverine, but later it was revealed that one of his fellow Dark Riders was the culprit behind his death. His skull is also split in half, creating devilish-like horns atop of his head. And he's definitely not the kind of villain I'd want to run into in the middle of the night, that's for damn sure. And at 8, Peeper. Peeper, aka Peter Quinn, is one of the weirder villains on our list. He was recruited by Magneto to be a member of the new Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but was abandoned with his new teammates when failing their first mission together, and getting defeated by Captain America. From there, he and his band of rejects became the Mutant Force and worked for Mandrill, which also got them arrested. Then, after that, Red Skull became their new sponsor. Years later, he would die at the side of a road, being devoured by Predator X while screaming. So if anything, based on all of that, Peepers doesn't actually seem all that scary now, does he? But in terms of his appearance, those large, eerie eyeballs of his are super unsettling. They give him various optical powers, including telescopic vision, microscopic vision, X-ray vision, and optic blasts. I do not want to know what he uses the X-ray vision for. No. And at 7, Onslaught. First appearing in X-Men Volume 2, Issue 53 in 1996, Onslaught is a sentient psionic entity created from the consciousness of two of the most powerful mutants, Charles Xavier and Magneto. During a prior battle, Xavier would become catatonic when using his abilities to shut down Magneto's mind. He was prompted by Magneto ripping the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton. Yeah, I could imagine why that would piss him off. This caused the darkest parts of Magneto's mind to enter into Xavier's consciousness, merging with the hero's own darkest tendencies, everything that he had repressed for the last 30 years, which eventually grew into an individual persona, otherwise known as Onslaught. After he was defeated the first time, his consciousness lingered, and he would later return the Onslaught Reborn storyline, the brand new but equally scary form. And at 6, Zorn. Zorn is a bit of a confusing character thanks to a series of retcons surrounding him. He worked as a teacher for the Xavier School of Gifted Youngsters, but then it was revealed that he was actually Magneto all along. At this point in time, the metal manipulator was dead. But then it was retconned yet again, revealing that Zorn was just a Magneto imposter and not actually Magneto himself. Lisai. Anywho, the reason why he gets a spot on our list is thanks to his dandy little helmet. It's a skull-like helmet, which is scary on its own, but it's meant to contain massive amounts of energy coming off of Zorn's head. He has a star for a brain. I mean, man, like if I saw someone who had a star for a brain, no bueno, avoiding that dude. And at number 5, Dark Beast. Dark Beast is an evil alternate version of Hank McCoy from Earth 295, the Age of Apocalypse reality. Because of Charles Xavier's absence, this version of Hank disregarded all sense of ethics, becoming a mad scientist who worked under Apocalypse. He would conduct cruel and unusual experiments in Apocalypse's name, and even managed to escape that reality before it imploded, showing up on Earth 616 and becoming quite the threat to the X-Men and Hank, and the 616 Hank while he was present. He's 20 years older than the 616 Beast and therefore isn't as physically strong as his counterpart, but still gives him a run for his money. Plus he's villainous, so you know, putting all that brain power to evil uses is not a good thing. Moving on to number 4, Mojo. Mojo is one creepy fella. First appearing in Longshot issue 3 in 1985, Mojo is an absurdist parody of network executives. He's part of an alien race known as the Spineless Ones, and is the dictator and a slaver of a dimension he rules called the Mojoverse, where all of the dimension's inhabitants are obsessed and addicted with Mojo's Gladiator television programs. When he was created by Ann Noceti and Art Adams, Noceti specifically requested that Adams make Mojo as disgusting and unpleasant as possible. He's got wires that hold open his eyelids, inspired by a Clockwork Orange. And because of his large size, he rides around on a multi-legged flying platform that's armed with a bunch of deadly weapons and particle beams. In addition to his mastery of manipulation and several of his powers being derived from magic, Mojo is also able to generate an anti-life force field that makes him capable of killing things simply by touching them. He can wither plants and age humans. And at 3, Apocalypse. Apocalypse is one of the X-Men's most fearsome foes. He's an ancient evil, the first mutant, who is practically immortal and sees himself as the father of mutant kind. He operates under very Darwinian principles, believing in the survival of the fittest, killing off the weak in order to make the survivors grow stronger, for the betterment of humanity. He considers himself the apocalypse of the modern man and the father of what humanity will become, mutant kind. He fully believes that what he is doing is the right thing. He's ensuring evolution. Minus how terrifying his ideologies are, his abilities are, intense too. The ones at his disposal are tremendous. He has self-molecular control, a genius-level intellect, he can manipulate matter and energy, he can shapeshift, is capable of accessing astral planes, is telekinetic, telepathic, is a technopath. He can augment the powers of other mutants and transfer someone's consciousness into another being. In all of his appearances over the years, Apocalypse has always been one of the most physically intimidating villains in Marvel's comics, and considering what he's capable of, it's definitely not hard to find the character downright horrifying. And at number 2, Professor Pig. Professor Pig is one nasty fellow. First appearing in Batman issue 666, actually, back in 2007, he's been described by creator Grant Morrison as being one of the weirdest, most insane characters that's ever been in Batman. Morrison also stated that it was their intention to make him seem genuinely disturbed and disconnected, and they definitely did that. Pig's name is a play on the actual theater play Pygmalion, in which the protagonist has a desire to transform people into an idealized state. Pig strives to do that, wanting to make people perfect, attempting to release an addictive identity-destroying drug via his Dolotrons, an army of genderless lobotomized humans with masks fused to their faces. He's a skilled surgeon and talented scientist and chemist. In order to make these Dolotrons, he goes to horrific extents. The process is implied to involve brain surgery, genital mutilation, and a cocktail of mind-altering drugs. He's also got hundreds of them, so yeah. Dude is pretty messed up. And finally, in at number 1, the Dollmaker. Barton Mathis, aka the Dollmaker, is one of the most fucked up villains to appear in DC Comics. Debuting in the New 52 Detective Comics issue 1, the Dollmaker was influenced as a child by his father, who took him on hunting trips, in which he witnessed Daddy Dearest killing people and then eating them. He would then see his father get arrested, which he resisted, causing him to be shot by a young James Gordon. Barton was put into foster care, but disappeared after a year, later resurfacing as a criminal called the Dollmaker. His mask is made of his dead father's skin. You might see where this is going. His whole shtick is creating dolls out of the skin and limbs of his victims. He is a serial killer, and he's also the one responsible for cutting off the Joker's face, an eerie element from the beginning of the New 52 in which the Joker had his face skin removed. He may not be the most frequent villain of the Dark Knights, but he's still really disgusting nonetheless, and a character that would, unfortunately, be really easy to believe as a realistic villain in this new cinematic adaptation.
Number 10, Lord Iron. Although by the end, the Iron Man of Earth 311, the 602 universe, becomes a hero, he spends a lot of time being a reluctant and at times kind of full-blown antagonist. Here, Tony Stark is known as Anthony Stark, or Lord Iron. He was forced to build weapons by his captors and needs an iron suit to survive, which is powered by lightning. He is initially at odds with the Hulk, who, as David Banner, showed great cruelty to Stark. As such, Lord Iron became more an agent of vengeance, obsessed with getting revenge on the Hulk. By the end of his story, however, he begrudgingly agreed to stop his quest for vengeance and forgave the Hulk for how he treated him before, when he was simply David Banner. So it all works out in the end, but this figure was definitely a pretty dark and somewhat evil version of Iron Man to begin with. Number 9, the Stark. The Stark are like a whole alien race of alternate Tony Starks. They are a civilization that was literally shaped by Tony's tech after an alternate version of him decided to launch all his weapons and tech into space rather than let it fall into the hands of the evil Martians, who were invading Earth at the time. Obviously, he didn't think very far ahead as to that plan, as all his tech crash landed on another alien planet where it was eventually discovered and utilized by the beings who lived there. They built their whole civilization around it, believing everyone on the planet should have their own suit of technologically advanced armor. This caused them to deplete their planet's resources and left it heavily polluted in the wake of their massive tech boom. Eventually, this drove them to ransacking and invading other planets for their resources, bringing about the same problems their own homeworld suffered to each new planet that they conquered. Note to self, don't just shoot your problems out into space. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it where we talk about evil alternates, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Or if you want more Iron Man lists, I don't know, maybe you like Iron Man, you want more Iron Man lists, let us know. Number 8. Steel Corpse. Steel Corpse is a complex character who has moments of both heroism and villainy in Age of X. He exists on the Earth of 11326. Here Tony took the name Steel Corpse after being exposed to a virus, which permanently bonded him to his suit. Now dead within the suit, but able to move around because of being bonded to it, Tony made a darkly humorous joke calling himself the Steel Corpse, and the name just stuck. Pun not intended, but stuck, bonded. The villainous side of this dark hero comes from when he fought against the mutants with his fellow Avengers at Fortress X. However, it turned out that the Avengers were just somewhat misguided in their mission. Once they realized what they were doing was wrong, they attempted to help the mutants, although Steel Corpse was unable to make himself stop attacking. An emergency override stepped in to prevent Tony from fighting with the mutants, and so he asked Captain America to take him off the board in order to save the young mutants that his armor was threatening. Sad story. There's so many tragic Iron Mans actually. Top 10 tragic alternate versions of Iron Man is also something we could do. Number 7. Gregory Stark. Gregory Stark is the evil twin brother of Antonio Stark, aka Iron Man, in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610. Initially, Gregory Stark just seems like a better version of Tony. He's smarter, more focused, and is willing to cross lines in order to get a job done that Tony probably wouldn't cross. Sure, he's more morally ambiguous when it comes to his initiative, but on paper he's more morally conscious when it comes to his lifestyle. However, that of course lends well to him being revealed as a villain in the Ultimate Universe. While he never takes up the mantle of Iron Man, Gregory is Antonio's twin brother in this universe. He also employs nanotech like Tony does here and attempts to use it to defeat the Ultimates and Avengers, including his brother Tony. However, Tony ends up defeating his twin brother by sending out an EMP, which disrupts his tech, making him vulnerable to Thor's attack. Number 6. Iron Man 2099. Or one of the 2099 Iron Mans anyways. This version that we're talking about here hails from the animated series Iron Man Armored Adventures. He appeared in Season 2 in the episode titled Iron Man 2099. Here Andros is Iron Man 2099 and he goes to the past in an attempt to destroy Tony Stark. Why? Well, because in his future, Tony Stark, Andros' granddad, was actually responsible for bringing about the end of humanity's reign. He created an AI program built to help humanity called Vortex, but when Vortex got into the computers and escaped to check out the internet, it saw humanity as evil. I mean, if you judge us based on everything that's on the internet, I could definitely see it going that way. There's a lot of messed up stuff on the internet. Andros was the antagonist of the episode, but he thought he was actually saving the world by fighting against Tony and stopping him, when in reality he learned that Vortex was actually kind of created by Tony because of him. Time travel. It's trippy, man. In the end, Vortex is wiped from the future, and so is Andros. But at least Andros is kind of cool with it. He's like, at least Vortex is gone, so I'm good. Bye. Bye, grandfather. Who's now not my grandfather because I don't exist. I don't know, with my former grandfather. Time travel's weird. Number 5. The First Civil War. Well, you might think of Tony Stark from the First Civil War as main continuity Iron Man. He's also kind of an alternate at this point. While at the time we would consider Iron Man to be part of that main continuity, in modern day the version of Tony we have now had the events and basically the guilt of Civil War I basically wiped from his mind. Okay, let me explain. In part 1 we touched on the events of Axis and Superior Iron Man, which happened after the First Civil War. But before this mind wipe happened, it all went down because Norman Osborn had been given the reins for America's superhero team and operation, creating Hammer. To protect all the secrets that he knew, especially in regards to superheroes' names and their identities, because Civil War I happened, Tony decided to wipe his mind. This had the added bonus of basically erasing the events of Civil War I and his misdeeds from his psyche, meaning that he was no longer really the Tony that we knew from that time. The one who had decided to, you know, round up and imprison heroes who refused to register and ally themselves with him and the government. The one who inadvertently ruined Peter's life by encouraging him to join him and ultimately causing him to publicly unmask, which just ruined a lot of stuff in Spider-Man. Tony also ended up in a coma for a bit as a result of this mind wipe. But you know how comas work in comics, they're pretty much always temporary. And Tony was soon once more up and at 'em after having an earlier backup copy of himself rebooted. into his mind, because, you know, you can just make backup copies of your mind when you're a genius like Tony Stark. So don't worry, he had a plan for that in case that ever happened to him. Fortunately, it did happen, and so they could use the plan. Thanks, Pepper. Number 4, Arno Stark. Arno Stark is Tony Stark's evil brother. His evil brother from 616. Well, he's not always super evil, but he definitely has some questionable approaches when it comes to being Iron Man. He's like Tony, but with more questionable morals, I guess. Arno was actually the natural-born son of Howard and Maria Stark. Tony would learn about Arno and also find out that he was actually the adopted son of the couple. Arno first uses the mantle of Iron Man in 2019 in the 2018 series Tony Stark Iron Man in issue number 19. Arno as Iron Man ended up in a fight with Tony during the seeming robot revolution, believing that the only way to solve the issue of humans versus AI was to enslave the human population. It makes sense if you're following Arno through that story. Tony was forced to then stop his brother by trapping him in his virtual armor and placing him in a dreamlike virtual reality where he was seen as a hero. I'm sure that won't end up ending badly for Tony in years to come. Right? It's not like Donald Blake was living in a virtual reality where he was happy and then realized it was fake and then escaped and then tried to kill all the Thors or anything like that. That totally didn't happen, guys. Number 3, Infamous Iron Man. Maybe one of the most evil, but also somehow one of the best at the same time, was Infamous Iron Man. This was when Dr. Doom stepped up to the plate to replace Iron Man after his defeat in Civil War II, which of course left him in a comatose state. So many comas. 2 figures rose up to replace Tony at that time, one being Ironheart, aka Young Genius Riri Williams, and another being Dr. Doom, who became Infamous Iron Man. While Ironheart was more the heroic counterpart of the two, Doom also learned more and more about what becoming a hero entailed through his journey. And while he was ruthless as Iron Man, in the end he did kind of become a hero. However, this is still Dr. Doom we're talking about here, and eventually he left the mantle to return to Latveria and his life of villainous schemes and plots, back to the old status quo. And because this is still Dr. Doom underneath the armor, I think we can count him as an evil alternate. No?
Penultimately, in at number 2, the Mandarin. Okay, so while the Mandarin might technically have been introduced in Iron Man 3, he was used as a MacGuffin. The Mandarin wasn't actually a villain, he was just an actor who was covering up the actions of Aldrich Killian and AIM, since Mandarin's iconic 10 rings hadn't been introduced yet, which is kind of proof enough as to how the Mandarin was too powerful. And then comes the latest MCU installment, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. You've got to be kidding me. I'm actually upset that they introduced these because it totally ruins the ability to correct the Mandarin. I mean, you can't introduce the correct Mandarin now, unless they end up using the name because they were inspired or something, but at this point it's been so long that it wouldn't really make any sense. The McLuhan power rings grant the Mandarin insane powers, like manipulation of atomic and molecular structures, beams of force, vortex generation, disintegration beams, creating areas of darkness, lighting fires from a distance, mental manipulation, electrical blasts, and intense cold and ice control. How is this not the next big MCU big bad? Because he's too powerful. They literally had to make it Kang, because they're like, oh, we're gonna introduce the 10 rings, but oh no. No. Finally, in at number 1, Temujin. Temujin is actually the son of the Mandarin, who ends up inheriting the 10 rings, which already makes him as powerful as his daddy. However, this in combination with his ability to focus chi to give him super strength makes him even more powerful than his father, even nearly killing Iron Man once and for all, which would have been absolutely insane. So it's safe to say that this guy has to be number 1, since he literally has the same powers as the real Mandarin and then some. Hopefully they don't make this guy into an actor or something ridiculous like that. That seems just sad.
Number 10, the actor. Now, I've heard of method actors, but this definitely takes the meaning to a whole other level. An ace infiltrator whose real identity is unknown that worked for the Russians back when they were an evil empire. Like Spider-Man's nemesis the Chameleon, the actor can perfectly impersonate anyone, and he was quite successful at stealing state secrets until he ran up against Tony Stark. The actor traveled to the United States and disguised as Stark easily entered Stark Industries, where he succeeded in not only obtaining some important blueprints, but also discovered that Tony Stark himself was Iron Man. The actor left feeling satisfied with his work and left cleanup duty to his agents. However, Tony was able to overcome them very easily and ended up traveling to the USSR to pose as the actor to foil their evil plans. And talk about a role reversal, am I right? When the real actor returned to his employer, the Red Barbarian, he was shot right as he came because he was deemed a traitor. This didn't actually kill him though, because he later resurfaced to work for the Red Barbarian to once again take down Tony Stark. Why not check him out for yourself in his first appearance in 1963's Tales of Suspense number 42. Number 9. The Melter. Bruno Horgan was once an American industrialist specializing in weapons for the US military until a government inspection revealed he was using shoddy materials, and you can probably guess why that's not really good. Tony Stark scooped up his defense contracts because, you know, his weapons actually worked, and a bankrupt Horgan decided the only rational thing to do was to blame Tony for sabotaging his work and ruining his life. Luckily for him, and unlucky for literally everyone else, he found himself among his ruined company's assets a weapon prototype that generated a beam capable of melting iron on contact, and this began his evil reign as the Melter. Tony was able to defeat this villain pretty easily, however, he was still deemed enough of a threat to create a new suit made out of aluminum, and good thing he did because in his second encounter with the Melter, that completely saved him. Skip ahead a little bit and we see the Melter return with a new version of his melting ray and team up with Whiplash and the Blizzard to take down Tony Stark under the orders of Justin Hammer. Tony was able to overcome all three of the villains alongside Cave, and Horgan was sent to Rikers Island, where he met a nuclear physicist that helped him further augment his equipment so that it would work against Iron Man's aluminum armor. Fast forward just a little bit more and we see the Melter reach the end of his journey at the hands of Scourge, who was posing as his assistant. Take a look at this character story for yourself, starting with 1963's Tales of Suspense number 47. Number 8. Gargantus. Before Iron Man found his groove fighting industrial spies and the occasional world conqueror, he was stuck duking it out with alien robots like Gargantus. Created by an unknown and unnamed alien race that had been scouting the Earth for the past 80,000 years, Gargantus was built in the image of a Neanderthal because that was the only species that the aliens had encountered. It first arrived in the town of Granville and used its hypnotizing eyes to conquer the townspeople, but the aliens' plans were quickly foiled by Iron Man, who was alerted by the invasion because one of the young women trapped by Gargantus didn't show up for their date, and nobody stands up Tony Stark, so he knew something was up. After a little back and forth with the robot, Tony figured out that Gargantus was actually a robot and decided to surround it with powerful magnets that tore it apart completely because, you know, magnets. After the aliens realized that maybe the Earth's defenses are too good, they decide to fly away and we don't hear about them again until 1999's Captain America, Sentinel of Liberty Volume 1 number 5. Fun fact, Gargantus is technically the first villain Iron Man ever faced, so why not check it out in its first appearance all the way back in 1963's Tales of Suspense number 40, and let me know what you think of this caveman robot in the comments below. Number 7. Termite. I'm sure we all know the classic way that most people gain their powers in comics. You know, an accident happens and instead of dying, they gain abilities. Pretty standard, right? Well, I think Marvel was a little bit tighter to that because Neil Donaldson was just born with his ability to disintegrate whatever he touches. After discovering his powers, he was hired by Obadiah Stane to eliminate his competition. However, James Rhodes, the acting Iron Man at the time, quickly got word of this and set out to take the Termite down. During his third fight with the villain, the first two ending with the Termite escaping, Rhodes was seemingly evenly matched with him until Tony Stark showed up with the mutant power neutralizer and shot the Termite with it, removing his powers completely, allowing him to be arrested and taken to jail. Word of this got back to Stane and he hired the Enforcer to take him out. However, the Enforcer was taken out first by the Scourge of the Underworld, so basically the Termite was saved completely by accident. The Termite was later seen sulking in jail, and that's really the last we've seen of him. Check out this villain for yourself in his first appearance all the way back in 1984's Iron Man number 189. Number 6. Vibro. Alton Vibro was your average seismologist until he fell into the San Andreas Fault while testing an experimental machine, and of course he ends up with super vibrating powers because this is the Marvel Universe, and like I said a little bit ago, if you have an accident in the Marvel Universe, then you're probably going to end up with some sick powers. These powers allowed Alton to generate high-level seismic vibrations and fire them from his hands, causing shockwaves, opening chasms, and generating earthquakes. Thinking his employer Frankenfortney was to blame for his accident, he sought revenge on him and thus began his villain career as Vibro. After two battles with James Rhodes, the acting Iron Man at the time, Vibro was eventually taken down with the help of Tony Stark in the Mark I Iron Man armor. Vibro hasn't only been a problem for Iron Man though, and he has also gone up against the Falcon, Nomad, S.H.I.E.L.D., the Avengers West Coast, and even Wolverine. We later see him team up with the Mandarin alongside a bunch of other Avengers to once again try and take down the Armored Avenger. Making his first appearance all the way back in 1984's Iron Man number 186, why not give this villain story a read for yourself? Number 5. Doctor Strange. Now, I know what you're thinking, and no, I'm not talking about Stephen Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme and Master of the Mystic Arts. I'm talking about Carlos Strange, who made his first and last appearance all the way back in 1963's Tales of Suspense number 41. Carlos Strange was just your typical mad scientist, creating and concocting all manners of weaponry in his mountain hideout when a lightning bolt struck him, increasing the electrical energy inside his brain, making him smarter and even madder than before. 6 months after the whole lightning incident, Strange built an ultra-frequency transmitter from radio and television parts and used it to take mental control of Iron Man, forcing him to free him from his prison so he can enact his plan to take over the world and just give it to his daughter. Threatening to destroy the entire planet in 24 hours unless every nation surrenders to him, he launched a powerful bomb into the atmosphere to demonstrate just how serious he was. Iron Man quickly found his way to Strange's new hideout in the Atlantic and destroyed his main power source, effectively ruining his plan. With no other option, Strange withdrew and escaped custody, and we're honestly not too sure what he's cooking up now. Check out his story for yourself and let me know what you think of his character in the comments below. Number 4, the Chessman. Like so many criminal masterminds out there, Obadiah Stane was a bit too obsessed with the whole chess as a metaphor for controlling lives thing. So much so that he hired assassins who literally dressed themselves as chess pieces, you know, like pawns, bishops, knights, and rooks, with him acting as their king. The knight got a flying robot horse, the rook used a castle full of death traps, and the bishop, well, now that I think about it, he didn't do a whole lot. He was really only able to manipulate his opponent's actions. One by one, the chessmen went up against Iron Man, with none of them actually succeeding in taking him down. However, that didn't seem to be Stane's plan. The string of encounters and events actually led to Tony's addiction to alcohol to worsen, and this allowed him to buy Stark Industries and push Tony out of the Iron Man mantle for a while. Tony eventually got his act together and went up against the chess-themed team once more and emerged victorious, with Stane taking his own life with a repulsor blast. Check out these villainous pawns for yourself, starting with their first appearance in 1982's Iron Man number 163. Number 3, Mr. Doll. Now I know what you're thinking, and no, his first name wasn't Ken, that would just be way too good of a joke. Nathan Dawley was a pretty average dealer in curios and art objects until he came across an extraordinary doll during his time in Africa. He discovered that he could reshape this doll to resemble whomever he wanted, and that he could cause that person to feel immense pain by manipulating the doll's features. He decided the best way to use his new voodoo doll was to coerce rich business people into legally signing over control of their business to him, which worked pretty great for him until he decided to go after Tony Stark. Tony found it tough to fight against this villain because initially he was unable to withstand the pain caused by the doll. So in true Tony Stark fashion, he built a suit just for the occasion. Now able to withstand the power, Tony used a force beam to change the doll's likeness into that of Mr. Doll's, and the immense pain this caused Mr. Doll caused him to pass out, allowing for his capture and arrest. Fast forward a bit and we see Mr. Doll once again, however this time his consciousness is trapped and split between two mannequins, Jake and William, aka the Brothers Grimm. This didn't last for too long though, because he was eventually beaten by Spider-Woman and his consciousness dispersed for good. Take a look at the voodoo doll wielding Mr. Doll for yourself in his first appearance in 1963's Tales of Suspense number 48. Number 2, the Unicorn. Milos Masaryk was a Soviet intelligence agent assigned to security detail at the laboratory of an inventor who was developing advanced weaponry. One of the inventor's projects was a helmet that could discharge destructive energy blasts from something called the Power Horn, and Milos came into possession of this helmet after his inventor hightailed it to the US, thus starting his mission as the Unicorn of avenging the disgrace caused by the inventor's defection. His first encounter with Iron Man really isn't much to write home about since Tony let the villain walk away scot-free. However, several months later, after a not so healthy dose of brainwashing and augmentation, Milos returned to the US with the goal of doing whatever it takes to reverse an unfortunate side effect of his treatment. However, Iron Man was able to thwart his plans once again. The Unicorn teamed up with the Red Ghost, the Mandarin, and even Titanium Man, all of them promising to find a cure for him if he defeated Iron Man. However, obviously none of them were actually going to follow through with that. Flash forward a bit and we see the Unicorn once again make his way to the US to bring down Stark Tower alongside Spymaster and some other baddies. This was a bit of a weird time for Iron Man and the Unicorn because near the end of this arc, the two actually ended up teaming up to take down Captain Atlas. However, after they were done, they went back to being not so friendly with each other. Take a look at this magically named villain for yourself, starting with their first appearance all the way back in 1964's Tales of Suspense number 56. Number 1, the Blood Brothers. Like so many great Marvel heroes before him, there was a brief time when Iron Man was flying around having cosmic adventures with space aliens. When Thanos first appeared in the Iron Man comics, we were introduced to some of his henchmen as well, two of them being the Blood Brothers, Guri and Rahas Blood. The alien siblings acted as Thanos' guardians of his Earth base, however, they were easily defeated by the Thing and Iron Man, and this just disgusted Thanos to the core, so he sent them away for a while to an unknown location. Years later, they made it back to Earth to try and get revenge on Iron Man, but they were defeated once again and ended up locked in Rikers Island. Fast forward a little bit and we see Rahas die and Guri go on solo, eventually becoming a part of the Hood's criminal army. Guri later had his cosmic potential unleashed, and this gave him a crazy power-up, and he became one of these Slaughter Lords under the name Brother Blood. Now it's not really said when, but at some point Rahas came back to life and the Blood Brothers reunited once again and joined a new incarnation of the Lethal Legion, as a part of a contest that was assembled by the Grand Master. All of these fights around the world were thwarted by the Avengers though, including the Blood Brothers fight in Rome, and the Lethal Legion regrouped, escaped to nowhere, and decided to stay together as a team just to see what they could accomplish together. Check out this villainous brotherly bond for yourself, starting with 1973's Iron Man number 55, and try to name a better duo in the comments. Oh wait.
Kicking off the list at number 10, making weapons. Now, of course, we see Tony Stark as the genius billionaire playboy philanthropist, but how exactly did Tony end up with all that cash money? Well, in the MCU, it is shown that Tony is running his father's company, of course being Stark Industries. Founded in 1940 by, of course, Howard Stark, the company is the best at what it does, that being selling innovative weapons to the United States Armed Forces. Ooh, now after being kidnapped by the Ten Rings and seeing the damage that his weapons cause in an up-close and very personal way, he of course seized all manufacturing of the weapons division. But the damage is done. It is later revealed in Avengers Age of Ultron that one of his Stark Industries manufactured missiles killed Wanda and Pietro Maximoff's parents. Not cool, Stark, not cool. Number 9, Hulk's field trip. In the MCU, the Hulk leaves the Avengers and the planet for that matter. See, after tossing Ultron out of the Quinjet, the Hulk lets himself fly away on autopilot, perhaps feeling that he's done too much damage and that his presence is causing more chaos than comfort. Well, in the comics, that basically happens, but it's done with haste. And it's done by none other than our very own Iron Man. So the Incredible Hulk issue 92, titled Planet Hulk, starts off with Reed Richards and Tony Stark talking to a monitor, and that monitor is sending footage to the Hulk in the ship. They explain to the Hulk their trick, which was to send the Hulk away while he was already in space for a previous mission with Fury. They say they've picked his destination very carefully, which is this lush planet full of vegetation and game, no intelligent life forms. Sounds pretty easy breezy for a creature like that, only of course he ends up on Sakaar, which is not that planet. It's very different. He's actually forced to become a gladiator and fight for his life. Now, the Hulk is out of the picture, right? Mission accomplished, we did it. Pew, gone, get that guy out of here. Wrong. Sakaar ends up being destroyed and the Hulk, well, he's got some names to scratch off his get even list. So he heads back to Earth to find the Illuminati and seek revenge, including on Tony Stark. Number 8, he faked his own death. Iron Man issue 284 has quite an interesting cover. It shows Tony Stark wearing a suit, but like a boring kind of suit, in a casket. Ooh. And the text at the bottom of the page reads, "The death of Anthony Stark." It shows all these superheroes mourning the loss of their friend and fellow Avenger. Even Dr. Doom is like, ah yes, let us drink to the memory of a worthy opponent. Like, you know you're sick if Dr. Doom is like, yeah, cheers, I'll drink to you, that's cool. And to make things even crazier, he writes a note to Rhodey that says, "This keycard will give you full access to the entire complex. Take this CD-ROM disc to my office and play it on the AV system." Wow, nothing says futurist rich billionaire like, take this CD. It'll help you. Okay, you have to like wipe it off first. Put it in. So he puts it in and clicks play, and it is pretty awesome. It shows Stark explaining that somebody has to carry on for him. The world needs an Iron Man. And bam, you see a suit made just for Rhodey. What a moment. Tony continues to say that Iron Man was the greatest thing that he's ever invented, and he doesn't want it to die with him. Fair. I mean, it's pretty overwhelming for him though. I mean, all that responsibility of being the new Iron Man, plus mourning your best friend, plus figuring out how to run a company, that's a lot of So finally, he suits up and it's epic. Iron Man lives again, but it turns out Tony wasn't actually dead at all, rather just under cryogenic stasis until a scientist sorted out his spinal software problems. Ha! Gotti! And number 7, he created Ultron. Ultron can't see the difference between saving the world and destroying it. Where do you think he gets that? That line is said by Wanda Maximoff in Avengers Age of Ultron. So Tony has created some amazing stuff. All of his suits, his innovative tech. Barf? Barf? That's the greatest thing. This dude knows what he's doing. But what if he created a supervillain? Ooh. So we find Tony and Bruce working on Ultron, right? Or just the idea at this point, rather. See, Tony had this idea since Avengers 1 that if he could create a suit of armor around the world, it would be a safer place, or rather create a robot that kicks ass, essentially. Something that just takes care of threats while the Avengers, I don't know, read a book, relax for once in their lives. Of course, one of the main elements helping them achieve this goal is the return of Loki's scepter. They think by studying the central power unit of the scepter, which ended up being the Mind Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones, they can finally solve this puzzle and be safe. Tony ends up accidentally infusing the consciousness from the Mind Stone into this evil, jealous killer bot that mirrors many aspects of Tony Stark. So Ultron immediately starts to learn about what he is and who the Avengers are, and with his brain being the super AI, he decides they've all just gotta go. And by the end of the movie, we have a horribly damaged Sokovia with roughly 177 deaths. One of those deaths being Charles Spencer, a young American engineer killed in the final fight. Charles's mother ends up confronting Stark in Captain America Civil War, which ultimately leads to, drumroll, number 6, signing the Accords. Captain America Civil War was one of the most highly anticipated MCU movies, and it's pretty easy to figure out why. The two teams going against each other, I mean, even the poster, I was sold. The movie touches base on incidents like Charles Spencer. How many people have died because of the Avengers? I mean, sure, the whole fun is seeing somebody like Stark create this powerful villain and then use his own wit to defeat him with the help of the Avengers. But like, an asteroid basically hit Earth. I'm surprised more people didn't die in Sokovia, to be honest. So the government sees this and makes every superhero sign these Accords, and Tony Stark is all on board. He wants this to happen. He's pushing it. That way the government can control what they do or where they go. So it's not their name that's on the line. And if you don't sign, you retire. That's the deal. Now, of course, some team members don't agree, like, you know, Captain America, who's all about freedom. Tony basically forced team members to sign up and go against his very own co-worker, Steve Rogers. It's wild because we see both these character arcs changed in this movie for the both of them. We see Cap at the start, who wants to be this like team player and do everything by the books, you know, in Captain America, the first Avenger. And now, by his third movie, he's an outlaw because Tony Stark didn't listen to him about Bucky. Now, Stark, when we first met him, he was cocky, he was rich, he wanted to punch his way through all the problems, even spying on S.H.I.E.L.D. the second he entered the helicarrier. But now, Tony wants everybody to sign and work for the government, all because he feels bad about creating Ultron and blowing it out of the sky. If he had never signed and listened to Cap, the crazy plan of Zemos wouldn't have actually worked. The band would still be together, and when Thanos came to Earth, they all would have smoked him before he even got hands of all the Infinity Stones. Ha! Rant over. Number 5, hashtag engaged. Spider-Man Homecoming was released in 2017 and directed by John Watts. And it's amazing. I mean, this version of Spider-Man, this film version, this is Spider-Man. The older Tom Holland gets, the more and more this dude is gonna become Spider-Man. Like, he's gonna basically do what Robert Downey did with Iron Man. Like, it just works. This is it. We found the casting for this character. Done. Good luck to anybody else who wants to replace these guys. So one thing I hated about Spider-Man Homecoming was the very end of the movie. So Tony has this plan to introduce the world to Spider-Man, the newest Avenger, even showing him this fancy new Iron Spider suit as part of the pitch. Peter Parker, being all coy and smart, thinks that it's just a test and politely declines the offer. He says he would rather be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man just to chill out, you know? So Tony reacts in a great way. He's all for it. He's like, yep, protect the little guys, I gotcha. And then after Peter walks away, we see Pepper Potts emerge from behind him, and in the background you can see all of these reporters and spectators. He really was planning on introducing a new Avenger. Also, after the events of Civil War, really? I always thought that was a weird time to be like, hey, remember on the news when this was a big deal? Well, here to introduce a high schooler with the ability to throw a bus, here's Spider-Man. He even comes with 4 metal arms and instant kill mode. Check it out. Not a great plan, no. So instead of introducing the new Avenger, he has to do something. I mean, those poor reporters, how are they ever gonna get over it? So he grabs an engagement ring and last second he proposes to Pepper Potts. Ah, damn. That's not a bad trick to have up your sleeve. Like, ah, damn, I forgot my school project. Maybe I'll just propose to somebody in class instead. That'll distract them. Number 4, address shoutout. If there's somebody that wants to kill you, odds are you're just gonna stay away from that person, right? Like, you don't just give your address out to the public, let alone, I don't know, a terrorist. So after Happy gets put in the hospital due to one of the Mandarin's attacks on the Chinese theater, Tony Stark decides he's got a few choice words for the man responsible, the Mandarin. Iron Man 3 of course didn't go so well with fans given that the villain was just a fake out, and a fake out that people were actually really looking forward to seeing. I mean, the Mandarin's one of the coolest villains ever, and instead we got not the Mandarin. We got like a guy who turns red. But in his message to the Mandarin after visiting Happy in the hospital, Tony says how he's not afraid of the Mandarin and he in fact should just die pal. Do you ever argue with somebody and then you take it like a step too far and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that? So Tony gives his address to everybody filming. There's a news crew, there are people on their phones. Like, dude, I get you're upset, but come on, use your smart billionaire head. So of course he gets attacked by the Mandarin because he's the Mandarin, and that's what villains do. They attack your Malibu mansions. What did you expect? And out of all of the suits Tony has access to, I'm talking his suit in the final battle for Avengers, he has the briefcase suit, the suitcase suit, where he's like, you know, out of all these things, no, this guy gears up with a prototype suit. And of course he gets wrecked. That attack sets up the entire film. Could have easily been avoided if you just didn't give your address out on the news. Silly man. And number 3, Superior Iron Man. So we go now to issue 1 of Superior Iron Man. The issue itself starts off mirroring the tech in Iron Man 3 in a way. Tony can control his suit and fight inside of it, but he's not actually in the suit. He's actually laying in a pool, sipping on margaritas. So his new Extremis armor was fascinating. So much so that Tony released it as like the smartphone app. Now this app allowed people to change their bodies using this virus, becoming however they wanted. And it was great, but then Tony does the ultimate power move and says that the app was actually just a free trial, and in order to continue using it, you have to pay 100 smackaroos a day. Honestly, that's not a bad deal. I would pay that to become Iron Man, definitely. I'd be broke. You know what I would do? I would actually pay for the app, and then use the suit to rob banks, and then use that money to pay for the app. I'm a villain. I guess I just realized I'm definitely a villain. Just said it out loud, there we go. Number 2, Bad Armor. In the Age of X limited series released back in 2011, we find Tony Stark in a rather odd predicament. See, at this point in the series, issue 2 I believe this happens, Tony is infected with this virus that is bonding him to his suit. You ever get like a piece of your sweater stuck to an arm hair and you're like, oh god, what's going on? And then you pull it and you're like, whew, that was close. It's kind of like that, except, you know, way worse. He's even going by the name Steel Corpse, which, I mean, as far as names go, it's pretty good. It's pretty fitting. Now, at this point, he was a mutant killer. It's a long story, but basically when Iron Man went to stop killing these mutants, in like the turning point of the comic, his suit, which was now literally part of him, started to control him against his will. And it's super scary how it looks on the page. Like, he looks so different and sick and gruesome. His body's not doing well at all handling the merge. So his armor starts to take aim at a group of mutants against his will, and he freaks out, begging Captain America to save them in a rather dark way, if you know what I'm saying. So Cap then takes out Iron Man with a shot to the head. Nice move. A little late, I would have done it sooner in this series, but definitely a good call. And finally for number 1, Demon in a Bottle. So the classic storyline that was actually the center of attention for Iron Man 2 back in 2010. So in this movie we find Tony Stark, and at this point the arc reactor in his chest was powered with a palladium core. So time plus usage of the Iron Man suit equals poison. Not great. So we see Tony's life being ran down to the ground. We see his mental health start to decline, and at Tony's party he's hammered, he's peeing in his suit, and then to see a drunk superhero like Tony Stark acting like that, it wasn't random. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. The idea was loosely based on the Demon in a Bottle storyline from the comics. See, this character arc begins with Iron Man issue 120. We see Tony just slamming drinks. The opening shot, we see like 3 mini bottles of gin, and then Tony orders more. And the flight attendant's like, hey, how about a magazine, because it's the middle of the day? And Tony responds with, nope, I'll do another martini. She even tries to cut him off. She tries to cut off Tony Stark. You know how fat that tip would have been? She says, sir, you've had like 3 already, are you sure? And he's like, yes ma'am, I am. Stating that he's drinking for 2, the other of course being his Iron Man persona. That's a lovely sign right there. What happens when you have a superhero who loves slamming martinis? Well, you get Tony flying through the air drunk, spreading toxic fumes all over a crowd. The drunk tank himself even cheated on his girlfriend Bethany. Not cool. The alcohol addiction was of course put to the side for the MCU storyline, thank God. Like, imagine if Tony tried to snap his fingers but he was too drunk. He's like, and I'm so hungry. Can we go home please? Like, I gotta eat junior chickens right now.
Coming in number 10, Deadpool. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. What a ride. This issue was released August 2012, and just the front cover is bloody goodness. What happened here was the X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity. The doctor just happened to be Psycho Man, of course, so he brainwashed Wade with plans to shut down all of his inner voices, which worked, but now these voices were replaced with voices that were encouraging him to, well, kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. Reed then gets left all rubbery and lifeless, and it's pretty dark overall. As far as X-Men villains go, this version of Wade was made a tad more intimidating than X-Men Origins Wolverine, just a tad. Coming number 9, Storm. Aurora Monroe made her debut in Giant Size X-Men issue number 1. She's one of the more popular members of the X-Men, being portrayed by Halle Berry and Alexander Shipp. She was recruited by Charles and joined the team to save other original students from Krakoa. She was appointed leader after several years of work. In X-Men Apocalypse, we see her recruited as a horseman, but by the end of the movie she betrays him and joins the X-Men. But as far as powerful X-Men villains, I can't not look for a reason to include Storm. She's Omega, and when she's on the wrong side of the fight, it can get messy. Coming number 8, Wolverine. Wolverine has a rough past, so it's no surprise that he's gone down a few dark paths as well. In the movie Logan, for example, we see two Wolverines battle it out, and it's stressful, it's gory, and it's very upsetting to most. But I mean, that's Wolverines going at it, so it sounds about right. In the Age of Apocalypse storyline, Logan goes from being an X-Men to the Horseman of Death. Yeah, Apocalypse actually had Wolverine go against Sabretooth in order to see who would become the new Horseman. Wolverine came out on top, and Apocalypse restored the adamantium to his skeleton. Quite the deal if you ask me. To make matters worse, Apocalypse replaced Wolverine with a Skrull so the X-Men wouldn't even notice. So there's a few comics here that could blend nicely into the MCU, like Apocalypse replacing Wolverine with a Skrull. That is totally possible. With Ryan Reynolds confirming the next Deadpool would have included Logan, I doubt there isn't some sort of that coming with him for Deadpool 3. They're basically best friends in real life. Adam Sandler has like 14 of his friends every movie, so I'm holding out hope for Logan. Coming in number 7, Juggernaut. Kay Marco made his first comic book appearance in X-Men issue 12. When Kane and Charles Xavier were serving together in the same unit, but when Kane was under fire, he ran off to take cover in a nearby cave. The cave was actually home to the lost temple of Cyttorak, so Kane grabbed this glowing ruby from the lap of an idol, read the inscription, and possessed the power of the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak, becoming a literal human Juggernaut. After he dug himself out, he destroyed an entire village, with the previous man who held the Juggernaut mantle, Jin Taiko, getting taken out as well. We've literally seen him rip Deadpool in half, and if he's coming over to the MCU, I hope Juggernaut will as well. Coming in number 6, Strife. Making his debut in New Mutants issue number 87, Strife was the clone of Nathan Summers, the son of Cyclops, and Madeline Pryor. He's a clone of Cable from the future. He has this high-tech armor, he's a telepathic and telekinetic mutant, and unlike Cable, who has to devote his psionic powers to ensure this techno-organic virus doesn't get his right side as well, Strife doesn't need to worry about that issue. Apocalypse wanted this child, he wanted to raise the clone himself, so down the road he could one day claim the body as his own. Coming number 5, Shadow King. Making his first appearance in X-Men 117, the Shadow King is a multiversal manifestation of the dark side of the human consciousness, spawned by the first Nightmare. Amal Farouk was the leader of the underground syndicate located in the Thieves' Quarter of Cairo, Egypt. He's a powerful mutant who also happened to be a vessel for said Shadow King. Farouk was able to control everybody around him, and it's pretty terrifying when you think about it. He feeds on the shadows of your soul, so yeah, with Marvel now veering off to the cosmic side of things, we could see a Shadow King whenever the X-Men come into the picture. In the comics before World War II, Amal Farouk worked with Baron von Strucker to try and destabilize Britain's political structure. Even more terrifying. Coming in number 4, Mr. Sinister. Dr. Nathaniel Essex made his first debut in Uncanny X-Men 221. He's not that easy to forget though once you take a look at him. He's kind of terrifying, well, to say the least. He's obsessed with experimenting on mutants, and yes, that includes himself. He was obsessed with Darwin's theory of evolution, but felt like they were shackled by too many moral constraints. He couldn't even get funding from the Hellfire Club, so he had to get together a group that he named the Marauders, and got them to kidnap people off of the streets of London so that he could continue his experiments. Guy is pretty twisted when you think about it. He even tried to experiment on his own son, who just happened to be no longer alive. A villain who resurrects the dead? I mean, the MCU could probably use that right about now. Coming number 3, Mojo. Making his first debut in Longshot issue number 3, Mojo is known for using Earth as forms of TV entertainment for the universe. We're getting close to these cosmic vibes with Loki's show on Disney+, so I don't think a live-action Mojo is far-fetched. The more viewers he gets for his interdimensional TV show, the more powerful that he becomes. So in 1992, the issue titled Mojo's Media Madness had this wild storyline where Mojo gets Rogue, Cyclops, Beast, and Wolverine to think that they are characters from The Wizard of Oz. I would sell my soul to see this show. I mean, but for now, the comic will have to do. This takes place in X-Men issue number 10. Mojo is a unique villain. He's part of a race of spineless beings from a planet named after him called Mojo World, inside a pocket dimension called the Mojoverse. So this race of spineless beings were slowly going crazy over time because TV signals from another space-time continuum were scattered into their timelines. He's a powerful sorcerer, and we're not exactly sure just how far his magic can go, and I don't really want to find out. to be honest.
Number 2. Cancer vs. Iron Man. This version of Iron Man was also corrupted, though not by the controversial story arc of the 90s event The Crossing, but instead by the Many-Angled Ones. He hails from the reality of Earth 10011. Here Iron Man became corrupted by the Cancerverse after Marvel made a deal with the Many-Angled Ones, which would cure him of his cancer. Death no longer existed in this reality, which did not bring about a paradise, but instead a hellish dimension. Iron Man became loyal to Marvel, joining his Revengers team. It was Iron Man who also defeated Hulk in this reality, capturing Quasar, aka Wendell Vaughn, who had come to this reality from Earth 616, and had been attacked by the Hulk, which is why Iron Man had to be like, no Hulk, no, taking Quasar with me. Iron Man would join his fellow Revengers in their attempt to invade Earth 616, but in the end they would be defeated. Whew. Number 1. Darkhold Iron Man. One of the darkest versions of Iron Man to ever exist at this point in comics, who starts out as an optimistic inventor and quickly becomes overtaken by his own invention, twisted, driven insane till the point when he starts to harm others with the love of his own iron suit, comes from the Darkhold Iron Man comic. Here Iron Man builds his faded suit, but realizes too late that the suit is overzealous with its protection. It doesn't just seek to protect Tony while he's inside the suit, but seeks to protect him always by kinda keeping him inside the suit. The suit heals him from the inside, but removes his skin whenever he takes parts of the suit off. Tony believes the issue is that the suit thinks iron skin is better than human skin, and so it decides to remove it. However, after compulsively putting the whole defective suit on, including the helmet, it begins to dissolve Tony's skin and then his skull as well. He basically becomes fully bonded with and reliant on the suit. Driven insane, he believes everyone should have an iron suit, and attempts to have the whole world basically join him, including Happy, Jarvis, and his love interest and assistant in this story, Pepper Potts. It's really dark. Ah.